Pretend I am arresting you and say absolutely nothing." The hot breath of the immigration officer tickled my ear as his hand clamped down on my shoulder with the force of a hydraulic press. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs, not out of fear of the law, but because of the terrifying familiarity of the situation. I looked up at my son Tyrell standing just 10 feet away. I expected him to scream. I expected him to fight. I expected him to demand answers. Instead, I saw his shoulders drop in relief. I saw his wife Heather suppress a smile. That was the moment my heart actually stopped beating. That was the moment Jeremiah Brooks, the retired postal worker, died, and the man I used to be 30 years ago woke up. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to watch the people you love turn into strangers right before your eyes. My name is Jeremiah Brooks. I am 70 years old. To the world and to my only son, I am just a retired mail carrier living on a fixed pension in Queens. I walk with a cane. I forget where I put my reading glasses. I complain about the price of milk. But 40 years ago, I did not carry mail. I carried secrets. As a financial analyst for a government agency that does not officially exist, I spent my life tracking money for cartels and corrupt regimes. I know how to spot a liar from a mile away. But the blind spot of a father is a dangerous thing. I never saw the lies sleeping in the bedroom down the hall. It started at the drop-off curb of JFK Terminal 4. The New York air was biting cold gray and miserable, matching the pit in my stomach. Heather, my daughter-in-law, was already tapping her foot against the pavement. She was wearing a pair of designer sunglasses that cost more than my first car. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tight it looked like it was pulling her face into a permanent sneer. "Move it." "Jeremiah," she snapped, not even looking at me. "We are going to miss the check-in window because you are shuffling like a zombie." I gripped the handle of my old, battered suitcase. It was the same one I had used for 20 years. One of the wheels was stuck, dragging across the concrete with a screeching sound that made people turn and look. "I am coming." "Heather," I mumbled, playing the part I had perfected. "My knee is acting up today. The cold gets into the joints." She rolled her eyes behind those dark lenses. Tyrell grabbed his bag. "He is embarrassing us." My son Tyrell stood by the trunk of the Uber. He looked tired. He always looked tired these days. At 32, he had the eyes of a man who was constantly looking over his shoulder. He was wearing a tracksuit that looked brand new and a gold chain that I knew was fake. He hesitated, looking at his wife, then at me. "Just hurry up, Pop," he said, his voice lacking any real authority. "We have to get through security. This flight to Mexico is not going to wait for us." He did not reach for my bag. He just adjusted his backpack and started walking toward the sliding doors. I watched him go. This was the boy I had raised alone after his mother passed. I had worked double shifts. I had put every spare dollar into his college fund. I had taught him to look a man in the eye and shake his hand. Now he was walking 5 steps behind his wife, terrified of upsetting her, leaving his old man to struggle with a broken suitcase. Inside the terminal, the noise was deafening. Thousands of people rushing announcements, blaring the smell of overpriced coffee and anxiety. Heather cut through the crowd like a shark. She held our passports in her hand, clutching them tightly. She had insisted on holding mine for safekeeping. "Keep up, old man," she hissed, grabbing my elbow with her sharp manicured nails. Her grip was painful. "If we miss this flight because of you, I swear I will leave you right here on the linoleum. I am trying." "Heather," I said, allowing a tremor to enter my voice. "I just need to catch my breath." "You can breathe when we get to the resort," she said, pulling me forward. "Although I doubt you will appreciate it. It is wasted on someone who thinks Applebee's is fine dining." I looked at Tyrell again. He was staring at his phone, furiously texting someone. His thumbs moved a mile a minute. Sweat was beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Who are you texting, son?" I asked gently. He jumped, almost dropping the phone. "No one, Pop. Just work. Just tying up some loose ends before the vacation." Work. Tyrell had not held a steady job in 2 years. He told me he was a freelance consultant. I knew he was a gambler with a losing streak that was about to swallow him whole. But I kept quiet. I played the fool. I let them think I believed this trip to Mexico was a gift for my 70th birthday. A week in paradise, they said. A chance for us to reconnect. We reached the security checkpoint. The line was long, winding back and forth like a snake. Heather huffed, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "We should have paid for the expedited screening." "Next time, Tyrell, do not be so cheap." "We do not have the money for that," Heather Tyrell whispered, looking around nervously. "We would have the money if your father was not sitting on that house in Queens like a dragon on a pile of gold," she shot back, not bothering to lower her voice. I pretended not to hear. I stared at the floor, leaning heavily on my cane. The house. It always came back to the house. It was a modest 2-story brownstone, but in today's market it was worth nearly $2 million. It was paid off. It was all I had left. And they wanted it. Next, a TSA agent shouted. We moved forward. I fumbled with my shoes, my belt. My hands were shaking partly from age, partly from the adrenaline that was starting to flood my system. My old instincts were waking up. I could feel eyes on me, not the annoyed passengers behind us. Something else, a predator's gaze. I walked through the body scanner. I stepped out and waited for Tyrell and Heather. They were busy gathering their expensive leather carry-ons. "Sir, step this way," a voice boomed. I turned. A man in a dark suit stood there. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face carved out of granite. He held a badge that flashed gold under the fluorescent lights. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or maybe Homeland Security. To the average person, it did not matter. It just meant trouble. Me. I pointed to my chest, widening my eyes in confusion. "Yes, you. Jeremiah Brooks." He closed the distance between us in 2 strides. Before I could say another word, he spun me around. He slammed my chest against the metal table used for bag checks. The sound of impact made the entire security line go silent. "Hey," Tyrell shouted, but he didn't move forward. He stayed back behind the barrier. "What is going on?" "That is my father." The officer ignored him. He grabbed my wrists and pulled them behind my back. I felt the cold, hard steel of handcuffs clicking shut. It was tight, aggressive. "You are under arrest for international wire fraud and money laundering." The officer announced, his voice loud enough for the back of the line to hear. What I cried out, putting panic into my voice. "I am just a mailman. I do not even own a computer." "Tyrell, tell them. Tell them I am innocent." I looked at my son. This was it. This was the moment. A son defends his father. A son screams. A son calls a lawyer. Tyrell stood frozen. His face went pale, but his eyes darted to Heather. Heather did not look scared. She looked at the officer, then at me, and a slow, cold realization spread across her face. She leaned close to Tyrell and whispered something. "I have good hearing. I always have." "Let him go," she whispered. Tyrell looked at her, shocked. "What if he gets arrested? He cannot get on the plane," she hissed. "We do not have to take him to Mexico. We do not have to do the dirty work. The government is taking him off our hands." My stomach turned over. The dirty work. I had suspected it. I had feared it. But hearing it confirmed was like taking a bullet to the gut. They weren't taking me to Mexico for a vacation. They were taking me there to leave me, or worse. The officer whose name tag read Miller yanked me upright. He leaned in close, his face inches from mine. To the crowd, it looked like he was intimidating a suspect. "Pretend I am arresting you," he whispered, his voice barely a breath against my ear. "Stay silent. Tyrell did not buy you a return ticket, Jeremiah." The world tilted. No return ticket, a one-way trip. They were going to dump me in a foreign country with no passport, no way home, and while I was gone, they would sell the house. It was the oldest scam in the book, usually pulled by strangers, not by your own flesh and blood. I looked at Agent Miller. I recognized the code in his eyes. He wasn't just a random officer. He was a contact. A favor called in by an old friend I hadn't spoken to in 30 years. I had set a failsafe months ago when Tyrell first asked for my passport details just in case. I never thought I would actually need it. I let my legs go weak. I sagged against Agent Miller, letting him drag me. "Tyrell!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Do not let them take me." Tyrell took a half step forward, raising his hand. "Pop! Heather grabbed his arm. She dug her fingers into his bicep. "Stop," she commanded. "Do not get involved. If they investigate him, they might investigate us." "Do you want them looking at your bank accounts? Do you want them asking about the loan sharks?" "Let him go. We will call a lawyer from the hotel in Mexico." From the hotel. They were still going to go. They were going to get on that plane, drink champagne in first class, and toast to their freedom while their father was dragged away in handcuffs. Tyrell looked at me one last time. I saw the struggle in his face. the weak, pathetic struggle of a man who had never stood up for anything in his life. He looked at the handcuffs, he looked at his wife, and he stepped back. "I will call you Pop," he called out, his voice thin and hollow. "Just do what they say. We have to catch the flight. We can't lose the money for the tickets." He turned his back. He actually turned his back. Agent Miller shoved me forward. "Move." He marched me away from the checkpoint down a long corridor restricted to authorized personnel. I walked with my head down, shoulders hunched, the picture of a defeated old man. But inside, the fire was starting to burn. The grief was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard rage. We turned a corner out of sight of the public. The sounds of the terminal faded. We were in a concrete hallway with buzzing fluorescent lights. Miller stopped. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key. He unlocked the cuffs. "You okay, sir?" he asked, his voice completely different now. Respectful, steady. I rubbed my wrists. The skin was red. I stood up straight, shedding the hunch, shedding the confusion. I looked at Miller with the clear, sharp eyes of the man I used to be. "Did you verify the ticket information?" I asked. "Yes, sir." Miller handed me a tablet. "Tyrell Brooks and Heather Brooks. Round trip first class. Jeremiah Brooks. One-way economy. No checked luggage for you. They were not planning on you staying long enough to need a change of clothes." I looked at the screen. The evidence was right there in black and white. "And the resort I asked?" Miller swiped the screen. "Fake booking. They printed out a confirmation for a 5-star hotel to show you, but the actual reservation is for a hostel in Tijuana, 2 nights, then they fly back. Without you." I handed the tablet back. My hand was steady. My heart was ice. They were going to abandon me, drop me in a border town like a stray dog. They probably figured I would get confused, get lost, maybe get hurt. By the time the consulate figured out who I was, the house would be sold, the money laundered, and they would be gone. Sir Miller said gently, "We have enough to pull them in right now for conspiracy, elder abuse, attempted fraud. We can stop them at the gate." I shook my head. "No, sir, if we stop them now, they will claim it was a mistake. They will say they booked the wrong ticket. They will get a slap on the wrist. They will cry and apologize and wait for the next chance to put a pillow over my face while I sleep." I adjusted my collar. I looked down the hallway where my son was currently boarding a plane to celebrate my disposal. "I need them to do it, Miller. I need them to go through with it. I need to see how far they will go." "But sir, if they get on that plane—" "I am getting on that plane too," I interrupted. Miller looked at me like I was crazy. "Sir, you cannot be serious. They think you are arrested." I smiled, but there was no humor in it. It was a smile that used to make cartel accountants wet their pants in the 80s. "Bureaucratic error, Miller. A mix-up with the names. You apologize profusely. You rush me to the gate just in time. You tell them I am cleared. And then what Miller asked. You get on a plane with 2 people who plan to dump you in a desert." Then I said, walking toward the door, "I become the nightmare they deserve. I am going to Mexico, Miller. But I am not the one who is going to get left behind." Miller hesitated, then nodded. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, flat device. "Wire," he said. "GPS tracker and high-fidelity audio. Battery life 48 hours. I took it and slipped it into the lining of my coat. "Let's go," I said. "I do not want to miss my flight. My son is waiting for me." Miller recuffed me gently this time, but keeping the appearance up. We walked back out into the noise of the terminal. The game had changed. They thought they were the predators culling the weak from the herd. They didn't know they had just locked themselves in a cage with the only thing more dangerous than a criminal, a father with nothing left to lose. As we approached the gate, I saw them. They were handing their boarding passes to the attendant. Heather was laughing, her head thrown back, looking lighter than she had in years. Tyrell was smiling, his shoulders relaxed. They looked happy. They looked relieved. I took a deep breath. It was time for the performance of a lifetime. "Wait!" Miller shouted, waving a paper in the air. "Stop the boarding." Heather froze. She turned around. When she saw me, the color drained from her face so fast she looked like a corpse. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. I shuffled forward, looking pathetic and small. It was a mistake. I called out, my voice trembling. "They mixed me up with someone else. I can go." "Isn't that wonderful, Tyrell? I can still come with you." Tyrell looked at me. He looked at the gate. He looked at his wife. And for a second I saw the wish in his eyes that I had just stayed in that interrogation room forever. "Yeah, Pop," he said, his voice cracking. Wonderful. I stepped onto the jet bridge. The tunnel to the plane felt like a throat swallowing me whole. One-way ticket, I thought. You better enjoy the ride, son, because the landing is going to be rough. The heavy metal door slammed shut, sealing out the noise of the terminal and sealing us inside a box of concrete and fluorescent light. The interrogation room was cold, designed to make people shiver and break, but I did not shiver. I stood in the center of the room, staring at the one-way mirror, watching my own reflection. I looked like a confused old man in a cheap coat, but my eyes were burning. Behind me, I heard the click of a key. The handcuffs fell from my wrists. Agent Miller stepped around to face me. He did not look like the aggressive officer who had just slammed me against a table. He looked like a man who was about to deliver a death notification. He tossed a manila folder onto the metal table between us. It landed with a heavy thud that echoed in the silence. "Sit down, Jeremiah," he said softly. "You need to see this." I sat. My joints popped, a reminder of my age, but my hands were steady as I opened the folder. The first thing I saw was a printout of an airline itinerary. It was for Delta Airlines Flight 492 to Mexico City. I scanned the names: Tyrell Brooks and Heather Brooks, seat 1A and 1B. First class. The price tag for their tickets was over $4,000 each. I turned the page. Jeremiah Brooks, seat 34E, middle seat, economy, one way. The return field was blank. I stared at that blank space. It was not just a missing date, it was a statement. It said that as far as my son was concerned, I had no future. I was not coming back. They were going to sip champagne and stretch their legs in leather seats while I sat in the back, flying toward my own disposal. "Keep reading," Miller said, his voice tight with suppressed anger. I flipped to the next document. It was a contract written in Spanish, a language I speak fluently, though Tyrell never knew that. It was for a facility called El Descanso in a rural province 3 hours from the nearest airport. The brochure stapled to it showed a sunny courtyard and smiling nurses, but I knew how to read between the lines of these places. I looked at the fine print. No medical staff on site, no visitation rights required, no phone access for residents. It was not a retirement home. It was a warehouse for unwanted human beings, a place where people went to be forgotten until they died of neglect. And here is the kicker, Miller said, sliding a glossy photo across the table. It was a picture of the facility taken from the street, not the brochure. It looked like a prison. High walls, barbed wire, paint peeling off the concrete. They put down a $5,000 non-refundable deposit, Miller explained. They paid in cash. Your cash, Jeremiah. They withdrew it from the joint account you set up for emergencies 2 days ago. I closed the folder. I placed my hands flat on the table. The cold metal felt grounding. I did not cry. I wanted to. A part of me, the father who had taught Tyrell to ride a bike, who had held him when he scraped his knee, wanted to weep until my throat bled. But that father was dying. In his place, the analyst was taking over. I was compartmentalizing the pain, locking it away in a black box so I could focus on the mission. "They aren't just abandoning me," I said, my voice low and rough. "They are erasing me." Miller nodded. He walked over to the corner of the room and turned off the recording equipment. The red light faded to black. He loosened his tie and sat on the edge of the table looking down at me. The professional mask dropped completely. "Boss, you do not have to do this," he said. Boss. He hadn't called me that in 15 years. To the neighbors in Queens, I was Jeremiah the postal worker. I sorted mail. I walked routes. I retired with a bad back. But before the mailbag, there was the badge. I spent 30 years in financial intelligence for the NSA. I tracked terror funding. I dismantled cartels by following the decimal points. Miller was a rookie I had trained in '98. He knew who I really was. He knew that the postal worker persona was just a cover I adopted to keep my family safe from the enemies I had made. I looked up at him. "Do not call me Boss Miller. I am just a retired old man who got tricked by his own son. You are the best forensic accountant I ever worked with." Miller shot back. "You taught me how to spot a shell company in 10 seconds. You taught me that everyone has a tell, and right now your tell is showing. You are angry, and when you get angry, things get destroyed." I stood up and paced the small room. My limp was gone. I didn't need it in here. "They are taking me to a hole in the ground, Miller. They are using my money to fly first class to bury me." "Do you expect me to be calm?" "I expect you to be smart," Miller said. "We have enough right here to nail them. Elder abuse, fraud, We can arrest them at the gate. We can freeze their assets. You go home, you change your locks, you write them out of the will, you live your life. I stopped pacing. I looked at the one-way mirror, imagining Tyrell on the other side of the terminal checking his watch, hoping I was gone for good. If we arrest them now, it is just a family dispute, I said. Their lawyer will argue that they had good intentions. They will say the facility looked nice in the brochure. They will say the one-way ticket was an oversight. They will get probation. They will walk away. And in 6 months, they will try again. Or they will wait until I sleep and use a pillow. Miller sighed, running a hand through his hair. So what is the play? I walked back to the table and picked up the contract for the Mexican facility. This place, I said, tapping the paper. It is run by the cartel. I recognize the Shell Corporation listed as the owner. I tracked them in the early 2000s. They use these nursing homes to launder money. They take the seniors' pension checks and Social Security, cash them, and funnel the money into drug operations. Miller's eyes widened. Are you sure I never forget a shell company? I said. If Tyrell is doing business with them even unknowingly, he is crossing into federal territory. But I need proof that he knows what he is doing. I need proof that he is not just a bad son but a criminal. I need to know where the rest of the money is going. He didn't just steal my emergency fund. He is desperate. You don't dump your father in a cartel warehouse unless you owe money to people who own bone saws. I sat back down. I need you to wire me up Miller. Miller shook his head. No way. It is too dangerous. If they find a wire on you in Mexico... They won't find it, I interrupted. They see a senile old man who can barely tie his shoes. They are arrogant. Arrogance makes people blind. They won't look for a wire because they don't think I am a threat. I unbuttoned my shirt. Do it. Miller hesitated for a long moment. He looked at the folder, then at me. He saw the resolve in my eyes. He knew that if he refused, I would find another way. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small black case. This is the new tech, he said, opening it. It is not a wire taped to your chest. It is a button. He picked up a small, round device that looked exactly like a black plastic button. He pulled a pocket knife from his belt and popped the second button off my coat. In seconds, he sewed the transmitter in its place. GPS tracker, high-fidelity microphone, Miller said, working quickly. It connects to the satellite network. I will have a team monitoring you 24/7. If your heart rate spikes, if the signal drops, if you say the safe word, we breach. What is the safe word? I asked. Postman, Miller said with a smirk. I buttoned my coat. It looked perfect. I touched the device. It was cold and hard against my fingers. This was my lifeline. This was my weapon. One more thing, Miller said. He reached under the table and pulled out a small burner phone. It was thin, smaller than a credit card. He slipped it into the sole of my orthopedic shoe under the insert. Emergency use only, he warned. If they take your phone, you still have a line out. I nodded. I stamped my foot to test the feel. It was undetectable. I took a deep breath. I closed my eyes for a second, summoning the persona. I let my shoulders slump. I relaxed my facial muscles until my jaw hung slightly loose. I brought the tremor back into my hands. When I opened my eyes, Jeremiah, the sharp analyst, was gone. Jeremiah, the confused retiree, was back. How do I look? I asked, my voice wavering slightly. Like a victim, Miller said sadly. Good, I said. That is exactly what they need to see. Miller walked to the door. He put his hand on the handle, then turned back. Why are you doing this, boss? Really? Why not just cut them off? I looked at the folder on the table. The image of the prison-like nursing home burned in my mind. Because a father's job is to teach his children Miller. I taught Tyrell how to walk. I taught him how to read. Now I have to teach him that you cannot sell your soul and expect a refund. I paused, feeling the weight of the truth. And because I don't want them to go to jail for abandonment, Miller. Abandonment is a misdemeanor in some places. I want them to go to prison for fraud, for human trafficking, for money laundering. I want to bury them under so much federal time that they will never see the sun again. Miller nodded. He opened the door. The noise of the airport rushed in. Let's go, he said loudly, slipping back into his role. I checked the system. It seems there was a clerical error with your name. You are free to go. I shuffled out of the room, leaning on my cane, looking small and afraid. But inside I was hunting. I walked down the long concrete corridor, the tap, tap, tap of my cane echoing like a countdown clock. I was heading back to them. Back to the son who had sold me for a first-class ticket. Back to the daughter-in-law who looked at me like I was garbage. They thought they had escaped. They thought the problem was solved. As we neared the terminal, I saw the gate in the distance. The boarding had already started. They would be there handing over their tickets, laughing. I gripped the handle of my cane until my knuckles turned white. I am coming for you, Tyrell, I thought, and I am bringing hell with me. The look on Heather's face when I walked toward the boarding gate was not just disappointment, it was pure, unadulterated venom. She looked as though she had just watched a corpse climb out of a casket and dust itself off. Her mouth hung open slightly, and her perfectly manicured hands clenched into fists so tight her knuckles turned white. Beside her, Tyrell looked like he was about to vomit. He had been so ready to leave me behind, so ready to be free of his burden that my sudden reappearance seemed to physically sicken him. I shuffled toward them, dragging my bad leg a little more than necessary, playing the part of the confused and rattled old man to perfection. I clutched my boarding pass in a trembling hand and offered them a weak, watery smile. They let me go, I wheezed, acting as if the short walk from security had winded me. It was all a mistake, Tyrell, a computer glitch. They said my name was flagged because it is similar to some fugitive they have been hunting for years. Can you believe that? They thought your father was a criminal. I laughed, a dry, nervous sound that I knew would grate on Heather's nerves. I watched her eyes dart to the immigration officers standing in the distance. She was calculating, trying to figure out if this was a trap or just bad luck. Her arrogance won out. She decided it was just incompetence. She let out a breath that sounded like a hiss. Great, she spat the word out like a curse. Just great. We thought you were going to jail, Jeremiah. We were already discussing how to call a lawyer once we landed. You were leaving, I asked, widening my eyes in feigned hurt. You were going to get on the plane without me. We did not have a choice. Pop. Tyrell interjected, his voice high and defensive. The flight was closing. We could not lose the money for the tickets. You know how expensive they are. I nodded slowly, looking down at my worn-out shoes. Of course, son. The money. It is always about the money. Well, do not just stand there looking pathetic, Heather snapped, grabbing her carry-on bag. We are boarding. Unless you want to get detained again, move your feet. She turned on her heel and marched toward the jet bridge, not waiting for me, not even looking back. Tyrell hesitated for a fraction of a second. He looked at me and I saw a flicker of shame in his eyes, but it was weak and fleeting. He turned and followed his wife, leaving me to trail behind them like an unwanted shadow. I gripped my cane and followed. The game was still on. They thought they had simply hit a speed bump in their plan. They did not know they were walking into the lion den, and I was the lion. The separation began the moment we stepped onto the aircraft. The flight attendant greeted Tyrell and Heather with a bright smile, checking their tickets. "Welcome aboard, Mr. and Mrs. Brooks," she said, her voice dripping with professional warmth. "You are in seats 1A and 1B. First class is right this way. Let me take your coats. Would you like a glass of champagne before takeoff?" I watched them turn left into the sanctuary of first class. I saw the wide leather seats, the extra leg room, the warm towels being offered. Heather dropped into her seat with a sigh of luxury, immediately kicking off her heels. Tyrell sat beside her, already reaching for a drink to drown his guilt. I stepped forward, holding out my ticket. The flight attendant's smile faltered just a fraction. "Row 34, she said, pointing down the long, narrow aisle toward the back of the plane. "All the way to the back, sir. Economy." I walked past the curtain that separated the worlds. I saw Heather clinking her champagne flute against Tyrell's glass. She whispered something in his ear, and he laughed, a nervous staccato sound. They did not even glance at me. I was invisible again. A problem solved, a package stored in the cargo hold. I trudged down the aisle, bumping my shoulders against the seats. The air back here was stale, smelling of recycled oxygen and too many bodies. Row 34 was the second to last row right in front of the lavatories. My seat was 34E, the middle seat. I squeezed in between a large man who was already asleep and snoring and a teenage girl who was loudly chewing gum and texting. There was no leg room. My knees pressed against the seat in front of me. This was my punishment for existing. This was the value my son placed on my comfort. The flight was long and brutal. My back ached for real this time, but I did not complain. I sat in silence, analyzing every move I had made so far. The wire sewn into my coat button was itching against my chest, but I dared not scratch it. I needed to make sure it was recording clear audio. I needed to capture their cruelty in high definition. About 2 hours into the flight, the beverage cart finally made its way to the back. I was parched. My throat felt like sandpaper. "Water, please," I rasped to the flight attendant. She handed me a small plastic cup with 2 ice cubes and a splash of water. It was gone in one swallow. "Could I have the bottle?" I asked. "I am very thirsty." "I am sorry, sir," she said, looking tired. "We are running low on complimentary water. You can purchase a large bottle for $5. I reached for my wallet, but stopped. I remembered my role. I was supposed to be the broke pensioner who relied on his son for everything. I did not have $5. Not in this persona. I sighed and leaned back, closing my eyes. A few minutes later, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was not a gentle touch. It was a claw. I opened my eyes to see Heather standing over me. She had come back from the front of the plane. She held a glass of wine in one hand, but her eyes were cold. "What do you think you are doing?" she hissed, keeping her voice low so the other passengers would not hear. I blinked, confused. "I asked for water, Heather." "I am thirsty." "I saw you trying to buy a bottle," she said. "Do you have any idea how much things cost on a plane? $5 for water. That is extortion. You can wait until we land." I looked at her wine glass. It was a rich, dark red, probably a Cabernet. It was free for her, included in the ticket price I had paid for. "You are drinking wine," I pointed out softly. "That is different," she snapped. "We are in first class. It is part of the service. You are in economy. You do not spend money we do not have on frivolous things. You drink the free cup and you shut up. It is just water." "Heather," I said, letting my voice crack, "I am dehydrated. The air is dry." "Stop being a drama queen," she whispered, leaning in closer. Her perfume was expensive, cloying, and suffocating. "You are always so needy. Just sit here, be quiet, and stop embarrassing us. If you ask for anything else, I will make sure Tyrell knows you are wasting his inheritance." She straightened up, smoothed her skirt, and walked back toward the front of the plane without looking back. The man next to me shifted in his sleep, muttering something about rude people. I stared at the seat back in front of me. Wasting his inheritance. She had said the quiet part out loud. She was already counting the money she thought she would get when I was gone. She denied an old man a bottle of water to save $5 while sipping on premium wine. It was petty. It was cruel. And it was exactly the kind of evidence I needed to show a jury what kind of character she had. I waited 20 minutes. I needed to move. I needed to get closer to them. The wire in my button had a decent range, but the drone of the engines was loud. I unbuckled my seatbelt and stood up. "Excuse me," I muttered to the sleeping man, squeezing past his knees. I grabbed my cane and started the long walk toward the front of the plane. The fasten seatbelt sign was off. I walked slowly, playing the infirm old man, stopping to catch my breath, grabbing the headrests for support. The flight attendants ignored me, assuming I was just stretching my legs or heading to the front lavatory. I reached the curtain that separated economy from first class. I paused, pretending to adjust my shoe. Through the gap in the fabric, I could see them. They were in the first row. Their seats were reclined. Tyrell had headphones on, his eyes closed. But Heather was awake. She was typing furiously on her laptop, a glass of bourbon now sitting on her tray table. I slipped into the lavatory located just behind the cockpit, right next to the first-class cabin. It was a risk, but I had to take it. I locked the door and the light flickered on. The space was cramped and smelled of harsh disinfectant. I leaned against the sink and splashed cold water on my face, washing away the sweat of the performance. I looked in the mirror. The eyes staring back were hard and cold. I reached into my coat and pressed a tiny sequence on the hidden device, verifying it was active and transmitting. The small green LED blinked once, then vanished. Miller was listening. Good. I pressed my ear against the wall of the lavatory. The partition between the bathroom and the first-class cabin was thin, meant to save weight, not sound. I could hear the low hum of conversation. Heather was on the phone. She must have paid for the in-flight Wi-Fi calling. "Yes, I know it is short notice," she was saying, her voice muffled but distinct enough for my trained ears. "We need it listed by Monday." "No, we cannot do an open house. We want a cash buyer. Fast close." I held my breath. She was talking to a real estate agent. "The deed is in the old man's name," she continued, impatient. "But do not worry about that. We have the power of attorney paperwork signed. He is incapacitated. He will not be contesting the sale. Incapacitated. That was their plan. They were not just going to leave me in Mexico. They were going to declare me mentally incompetent, probably with a forged doctor's signature or a bribe, and sell my home out from under me before I could even find a way back. Yes, lower the asking price if you have to, she said. We want to dump it. 1.5 million. If you can get a buyer in a week, we will give you a double commission. Just get it done. 1.5 million. The house was worth 2. She was willing to lose $500,000 just to get the cash quickly and run. It was a fire sale, a liquidation of my life. I heard Tyrell's voice then, groggy, probably waking up. Who are you talking to? Just the realtor, babe? Heather said, her voice instantly changing from sharp to sweet. Taking care of our future. Once we drop him off at that place, we are free. We sell the house, pay off your debts, and we finally live the life we deserve. Are you sure about the place? Tyrell asked. It looked kind of rough in the pictures. It is fine, Tyrell, she dismissed him. It is cheap. That is what matters. He will have a bed and food. It is more than he deserves after dragging us down for so years. Now go back to sleep. I am handling business. I stepped back from the wall. My hands were shaking, but not from age. They were shaking with rage. They were selling my home, my sanctuary, the place where I had raised my son and mourned my wife. They were selling it for a quick payout to cover gambling debts and fund a lifestyle they had not earned. I unlocked the lavatory door and stepped out. I glanced through the curtain one last time. Heather was sipping her bourbon, scrolling through Zillow on her screen. Tyrell was asleep, his mouth hanging open. I walked back to row 34. The walk felt longer this time. Every step was a promise. You want to sell my house, Heather? You want to declare me incapacitated? You want to leave me in a hole in Mexico? I sat down in my middle seat, squeezing between the snorer and the texter. I buckled my belt. I touched the button on my coat again. You are going to try to sell my life. I thought, staring at the back of the seat in front of me. But you forgot one thing. You have to own it first. And as long as there is breath in my body, you will never own a single brick of my empire. The plane began its descent. The landing gear deployed with a heavy thud. We were descending into Mexico, into their trap. But they did not know that the trap had 2 doors, and I had just locked theirs from the outside. The sliding glass doors of the airport opened, and the Mexican heat hit me like a physical blow. It was thick, humid, and smelled of diesel fumes and roasted corn. I stopped just outside the arrivals terminal, blinking against the harsh sunlight, leaning heavily on my cane. I looked around, expecting to see a shuttle bus for one of the luxury resorts that lined the coast. I expected to see a man in a white uniform holding a sign with our names. That was what the brochure Heather had flashed in front of my face 2 weeks ago had promised. Azure waters, white sands, all-inclusive drinks. Instead, Heather marched straight past the line of air-conditioned hotel shuttles and waved down a battered green taxi that looked like it had survived a war. The driver, a man with a face like tanned leather, threw his cigarette onto the pavement and popped the trunk. "Get in, Jeremiah," Heather barked, opening the back door. "We are wasting time." I slid onto the cracked vinyl seat. The air conditioning was broken. The windows were rolled down, blowing hot exhaust into my face as we merged into the chaotic traffic. Tyrell sat in the front seat, staring out the window, saying nothing. Heather sat beside me, scrolling through her phone, tapping furiously. "Where is the resort?" I asked, my voice quavering just enough to sell the performance. "I thought it was on the beach." "It is an eco-lodge," Pop Tyrell said without turning around. "It is authentic, away from the tourist traps. You said you wanted peace and quiet, right?" Authentic. That was the word people used when they wanted to sell you dirt and call it gold. We drove for 45 minutes. We passed the glittering high-rises of the hotel zone. We passed the vibrant markets of the city center. The roads turned from pavement to gravel. The buildings shrank from skyscrapers to concrete blockhouses with corrugated metal roofs. Stray dogs picked through garbage piles on the corners. The vibrant colors of the tourist brochures faded into the dusty brown of poverty. We stopped in front of a building that looked more like a fortress than a hotel. The sign above the gate hung by a single chain, reading Posada del Sol in faded red letters. The walls were high-topped with jagged glass bottles cemented into the rim to discourage climbers. There was no doorman, just a heavy steel gate that groaned as the taxi driver pushed it open. "This is it," Heather announced, paying the driver with a wad of cash. I stepped out of the car and immediately swatted a fly away from my face. The courtyard was dirt, not grass. A dry fountain sat in the center filled with trash and dead leaves. A scrawny cat hissed at me from the shadows. This does not look like the pictures, I mumbled, gripping my suitcase. They used filters, Jeremiah Heather snapped, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the reception. Stop complaining. It is rustic. It builds character. We checked in. The man behind the counter did not ask for ID. He did not ask for a credit card. He just took the envelope. Heather slid across the scarred wooden counter and handed her 2 keys attached to blocks of wood. He looked at me for a second, his eyes dark and indifferent, then looked away. He knew. In places like this, they always knew. They knew when someone was checking in but not checking out. Room 4 and 5, Heather said, tossing one of the blocks of wood at me. You are in 4. We are right next door. Go freshen up. We have a big day tomorrow. I walked to room 4. I unlocked the door and the smell hit me instantly. Mold, stale cigarettes, and something metallic that reminded me of old blood. I flipped the light switch. Nothing happened. The bulb was burnt out. Light from the courtyard filtered through the dirty window, illuminating a single twin bed with a thin gray blanket and a wooden chair that looked like it would collapse if I looked at it too hard. I set my suitcase down. Something scuttled across the floor. A cockroach the size of my thumb disappeared under the bed. I sat on the edge of the mattress, which sagged under my weight like a hammock. This was their paradise. This was the luxury vacation. They had brought me to a flop house on the edge of nowhere, a place where screams would be mistaken for television noise. I did not unpack. I sat there in the semi-darkness, listening to the sounds of the place. A baby crying in the distance, the low hum of a generator, and the sound of my son and his wife moving around in the room next door. They were close, so close I could hear the scrape of their chair legs against the floor. A sharp knock on my door made me jump. I did not have to guess who it was. I shuffled over and opened it. Heather stood there. She had changed out of her travel clothes into a tank top and shorts, trying to beat the heat, but she still looked out of place. Her eyes scanned the room, curling with disgust before landing on me. "Give me your things," she said, holding out her hand. "My things?" I asked, playing the confused old man. "Your passport, your phone, your wallet." "Why?" I clutched my chest protectively. "I need those." "Do not be stupid, Jeremiah," she hissed, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. "Look at this place. There are thieves everywhere. The maid service cannot be trusted. If you leave your passport lying around, someone will steal it and sell it on the black market. Do you want to be stuck in Mexico with no ID?" I hesitated, looking at her hand, then at her face. She was enjoying this. She was enjoying stripping me of my agency, my identity. She thought she was taking away my lifeline. "But I might need to make a call," I said, my voice trembling. "Who are you going to call?" she scoffed. "You are here with us. We are your family. We will keep everything in our safe next door. Come on, hand it over." I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my old leather wallet. Inside was $50 in small bills and an expired library card. I handed it to her. Then I reached into my jacket. I pulled out the passport. It looked real. It felt real. The eagle on the front was gold and embossed, but the chip inside was dead and the numbers were flagged in the database as invalid. It was a prop, a piece of theater Miller had procured from the evidence locker. And the phone she demanded, snapping her fingers. I pulled my smartphone from my belt clip. It was the one Tyrell had bought me for Christmas 2 years ago, the one he tracked with a family locator app. I handed it to her. She took the items and smirked, weighing them in her hand. "Good," she said. "Now you do not have to worry about losing anything. You can just relax." She turned to leave but stopped with her hand on the doorknob. "Oh, and Jeremiah, do not leave the room tonight. The neighborhood is dangerous after dark. We do not want you getting lost. We would hate for anything to happen to you before the vacation really starts." She slipped out, leaving me in the gloom. I waited until I heard her door lock next door. Then I sat back down on the bed. I reached down and untied my left shoe. I lifted the orthopedic insert. There, nestled in a hollowed-out groove of the rubber sole, was the burner phone Miller had given me. It was tiny plastic and absolutely vital. I checked the battery. Full. I put it back and retied my shoe. She had my dummy passport. She had my tracked phone. She thought I was a ghost in the system now, a man with no name and no way to call for help. She did not know that the button on my coat was transmitting every word she said to a server in Virginia. She did not know that I was not trapped in here with her. She was trapped in here with me. Night fell heavy and suffocating. The temperature did not drop, it just became sticky. I lay on the bed fully clothed, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. The walls of the motel were cinder block painted a sickly yellow, and they were thin, paper thin. I heard the shower run next door. I heard the toilet flush. And then I heard the voices. I sat up and moved the wooden chair over to the shared wall. I sat down and pressed my ear against the cool plaster. The audio from the button was good, but nothing beats direct surveillance. I cannot do this, Heather. It was Tyrell. His voice was low, shaking. He sounded like he was pacing. Keep your voice down, you idiot, Heather hissed. He is right next door. I looked at him tonight, Heather. Tyrell continued, his voice rising in panic. He looked so old. He was scared. He asked about the beach. He thinks we are here for a vacation. He is my dad, Heather. He taught me how to throw a baseball. He bought me my first car. We cannot just leave him here. I closed my eyes. There it was, a spark, a tiny microscopic ember of conscience buried under layers of gambling debt and weakness. I held my breath, waiting to see if it would catch fire. Oh, grow up, Tyrell. Heather's voice was ice, cold and sharp. Do not get sentimental on me now. Do you remember the phone call we got last week? Do you remember the man with the neck tattoo standing outside our apartment? That is different, Tyrell pleaded. We can find another way. We can sell the car. We can get a loan. We have maxed out every loan, Tyrell, she snapped. You gambled away the equity. You gambled away our savings. You owe $200,000 to people who do not send late notices. They send guys with baseball bats. They told you what would happen if you did not pay by the first of the month. They said they would break your legs and then they would come for me. There was a silence, heavy and thick. I do not want to die, Heather. Tyrell whispered. Then shut up and do what needs to be done, Heather said. The house is the only asset left. The only way we get that money is if we sell it. And we cannot sell it if he is living in it. We cannot sell it if he is around to object. But leaving him here, Tyrell's voice cracked, in the middle of nowhere. What if he gets sick? What if he dies? Then he dies, Heather said flatly. He is 70 years old, Tyrell. He has lived his life. He had his time. Now it is our time. Do you want to spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder? Do you want to be poor forever waiting for him to kick the bucket naturally? That could take 10 years. I am not waiting 10 years. I want my life now. I pressed my ear harder against the wall. My hands were clenched into fists. We stick to the plan. She continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Tomorrow morning we rent a Jeep. We tell him we are going on a scenic drive to the ruins. We drive out to the Baja Desert, way out past the cell towers. We stop for a bathroom break. He gets out. We drive away. Simple. The Baja Desert. It was hundreds of miles of nothing but cactus heat and coyotes. It wasn't a nursing home drop-off. It was a death sentence. But Tyrell started. There was a sharp cracking sound, a slap, flesh hitting flesh. I heard Tyrell gasp. Listen to me, Heather snarled. I am not going back to being poor, Tyrell. I am not going to let them hurt me because you cannot control your addiction. You got us into this mess. I am getting us out. Tomorrow morning we dump him. We drive back. We fly home. We report him missing. We cry for the cameras. And then we sell the house. Are we clear? Silence. Long, agonizing silence. Tyrell, are we clear? Yes, Tyrell whispered. His voice was dead. Yes, we are clear. I pulled away from the wall. I felt sick. Not the sickness of fear, but the sickness of grief. My son was gone. The boy I raised, the boy I protected, was dead. He had been killed by his own weakness and by the woman next door. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the dark courtyard. A single light bulb flickered over the gate, casting long, dancing shadows. Tomorrow morning, the desert. I reached for my coat and touched the button. I hoped Miller was listening. I hoped he had heard every word, because tomorrow I wasn't just going for a ride. I was going to war. I lay back down on the bed, but I did not sleep. I stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows move, waiting for the sun to rise on the last day of my old life. They thought they were taking me to the slaughterhouse. They didn't know I was the butcher. The sun rose over the Baja Desert like a blister bursting on the horizon, spilling angry red light across a landscape that looked less like a vacation spot and more like a graveyard for hope. It was 6 in the morning when Heather pounded on my door. Her knocks were sharp and rhythmic, the sound of a jailer waking a prisoner for execution. I was already dressed. I had been dressed for hours, sitting on the edge of the sagging mattress and listening to the cockroaches scuttle across the linoleum. I checked the button on my coat one last time. I checked the burner phone in my shoe. Everything was in place. I opened the door. Heather stood there in a khaki safari outfit that looked ridiculous, like something she had bought for a costume party. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and oversized sunglasses that covered half her face. Behind her, Tyrell was leaning against the railing of the walkway. He looked pale, his skin clammy and gray in the morning light. He refused to meet my eyes. He was staring at his boots, tapping his foot nervously against the concrete. "Good morning, Jeremiah." Heather chirped, her voice too loud and too bright for the hour. "It is a beautiful day for an adventure. We rented a Jeep. We are going to see the ancient ruins. It is a bit of a drive, but the brochure says it is breathtaking." I leaned on my cane and gave her a confused, sleepy smile. "Ruins?" I asked, forcing a tremor into my voice. "Is it far? My back is already hurting from that bed." "It is not far," she lied smoothly. "Just a scenic loop. You can sleep in the car. Come on. We want to beat the heat." We walked out to the dusty parking lot. A battered yellow Jeep with no roof sat idling. It looked like a metal skeleton. Tyrell got into the driver's seat. Heather hopped into the front passenger seat. That left the back bench for me. I climbed in, slowly grunting with effort, pulling my bad leg in with my hands. There were no seat belts in the back, just a metal bar to hold on to. We pulled out of the motel lot and hit the road. For the first 20 minutes we drove on pavement, passing small towns waking up. I saw women sweeping their porches. I saw men waiting for buses. It looked normal. It looked like life. But then Tyrell took the turn onto a dirt road that wound away from the coast and straight into the heart of the wasteland. The pavement gave way to gravel and then to hard, packed red dirt. The towns disappeared. The trees shrank into scrub brush and twisted cactus. The air grew hotter and drier, filling the open Jeep with dust that tasted like copper. We drove for an hour, then 2. We passed a rusted sign that marked the boundary of the Federal Preservation Zone. It was a nice way of saying we were entering a dead zone. I pulled out the smartphone Tyrell had given me, the one they were tracking. I held it up, trying to look frustrated. "I do not have any signal," I said, tapping the screen. "I cannot check the weather." Heather turned around in her seat. Her smile was sharp. "Oh, do not worry about that, Jeremiah. We are off the grid now. That is the point. No distractions, just us and nature." I looked at Tyrell. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. He was driving mechanically, staring straight ahead at the endless ribbon of dirt. He was sweating despite the wind rushing past us. "Are we lost, son?" I asked, leaning forward. "This does not look like the way to any ruins. It looks like the middle of nowhere." "We are taking the scenic route," Pop Tyrell said. His voice was tight, strained. "Just relax. We are almost there." Almost there. I knew what that meant. He wasn't talking about a destination. He was talking about a threshold. We were driving deeper into the silence. The only sound was the roar of the engine and the crunch of tires on rock. I looked at the GPS tracker on my button, discreetly tapping it twice to mark a waypoint. Miller would see it. He would know we had crossed the line. The Jeep climbed a rocky ridge. The landscape opened up before us, vast and empty. It was a sea of brown and red stretching out to the mountains in the distance. There were no houses, no power lines, no other cars. It was the kind of place where you could scream until your throat bled, and the only thing that would hear you was a lizard. Tyrell slowed the Jeep down. We were in a small depression, a valley surrounded by high rocks that blocked the view of the road we had come in on. It was isolated. Private. Perfect. "I think we should stop," Heather said suddenly. "I need to stretch my legs, and Jeremiah probably needs a bathroom break. You know how he is with his bladder." Tyrell brought the Jeep to a halt. The engine idled with a rough coughing sound. The silence of the desert rushed in around us, pressing against my eardrums. "Okay," Tyrell said. His voice was barely a whisper. "Everybody out." I waited. I let them get out first. Heather jumped down, landing lightly in the dust. She walked a few paces away, stretching her arms over her head, pretending to admire a cactus. Tyrell got out slowly. He stood by the driver door, his hand resting on the frame. He looked like he was about to faint. I grabbed my cane and climbed out. My feet hit the dust. It was soft, powdery. "Where is the bathroom?" I asked, looking around. "Just go behind those rocks over there, Jeremiah," Heather said, pointing to a cluster of boulders about 50 yards away. "We will wait here. Take your time." I looked at the rocks. Then I looked at my son. He was staring at me now. His eyes were wide, filled with a terrifying mixture of fear and resolve. He looked like a trapped animal chewing off its own leg. "Tyrell," I said softly. "Are you okay? You look sick." "I am fine, Pop," he said. Just go do your business. We have to keep moving." I nodded. I turned my back on them. I started walking toward the rocks, my cane sinking into the sand with every step. I walked slowly, painfully slowly. I wanted to give him every second, every possible heartbeat to change his mind, to call out, to say stop, to run after me and grab my arm and say, "Let us go home, Dad." I counted the steps. 1, 2, 3. I heard the Jeep door slam. I stopped. I turned around. Tyrell was back in the driver's seat. Heather was in the passenger seat. She was looking at me, and this time she wasn't smiling. She was watching me with the cold, detached interest of a scientist watching a lab rat. "Tyrell," I called out, raising my hand. "Wait." I left my bag in the back. Tyrell did not look at me. He stared straight ahead through the dusty windshield. I saw his jaw clench. I saw him shift the gear. "Sorry, Jeremiah," Heather shouted, her voice carrying easily in the still air. "We are in a hurry. You figure it out." Tyrell slammed his foot on the gas. The Jeep lurched forward, rear tires spinning and kicking up a cloud of red dust and gravel. It roared away, tearing up the slope we had just driven down. "Tyrell," I screamed one last time, not for effect, but because my heart was breaking. "Tyrell, do not do this." He didn't brake. He didn't turn. The Jeep crested the ridge. For a second, it was silhouetted against the blue sky, and then it dipped down the other side and vanished. The sound of the engine faded quickly, swallowed by the vastness of the desert. Dust swirled around me, settling on my coat, my face, my hands. I stood there alone. The silence returned heavier than before. It was a tomb-like silence. I was 70 years old with a bad leg, no water, no food, and no shelter, in the middle of the Baja Desert. According to their plan, I was a dead man walking. I would wander in circles. I would dehydrate. I would fall. And the sand would cover me before anyone even knew I was missing. I stood there for a long moment, watching the dust settle. I felt the heat of the sun pressing down on my shoulders. I felt the emptiness of the world without my son in it. The grief was a physical weight, heavy and crushing. But then underneath the grief, the anger flared back to life. It burned hotter than the sun. It dried my tears before they could fall. I straightened my back. I dropped the hunch. I lifted my chin. Jeremiah, the confused old man, died in that dust cloud. Jeremiah, the operative, was back. I sat down on a flat rock. I reached down to my left shoe. I untied the laces, pulled out the insert, and retrieved the tiny black burner phone. I powered it up. It connected instantly to the satellite network. Miller had given me the best tech the agency had. I dialed a single number. It rang once. Status Miller voice barked in my ear. "The package has been dropped," I said, my voice steady and cold. "They just left. They are heading north, back toward the highway." "Are you secure?" Miller asked. "I am secure. I am at the waypoint." "Copy that," Miller said. "Extraction team is inbound. ETA 4 minutes. We have a drone overhead. We have eyes on the Jeep. We are not losing them." "Good," I said. "Do not stop them yet. Let them think they got away with it. Let them drive all the way back to the airport. Let them get on that plane. I want them to feel safe. I want them to celebrate." "Understood," Boss Miller said. "Hang tight. The cavalry is coming." I put the phone in my pocket. I stood up and looked at the horizon. A low thumping sound began to vibrate in the air. It grew louder, a rhythmic beating that I felt in my chest. A black speck appeared against the blue sky, growing rapidly into the shape of a helicopter. It was a Sikorsky, unmarked, sleek, and predatory. It banked sharply, kicking up sand as it came in for a landing 50 yards from where I stood. The side door slid open. 2 men in tactical gear jumped out, weapons lowered but ready. They ran toward me, not seeing a helpless senior citizen, but a high-value asset. "Sir," the lead operator shouted over the roar of the rotors. "We are clear to go." I walked toward the chopper. I left my cane in the dirt. I didn't need it anymore. I climbed into the cabin and strapped myself into the jump seat. The operator handed me a headset. "Where to, sir?" the pilot asked. I looked out the window as we lifted off. I saw the tire tracks of the Jeep winding away to the north. I saw the trail of my son's betrayal etched into the earth. "Follow them," I said. "Keep your distance. I want to watch them run." The helicopter banked and accelerated, hunting the yellow Jeep across the desert floor. The chase was on. They had left an old man to die in the sand. They were about to find out that they had just declared war on a ghost. And ghosts, as everyone knows, always come back to haunt you. The wheels of the Delta flight touched down on the tarmac at JFK with a screech that sounded like victory to the 2 people sitting in seats 1A and 1B. From the surveillance feed provided by Miller's team, I watched my son and his wife disembark. They did not look like killers. They looked like tragic figures. Heather had rubbed her eyes until they were red and puffy. Tyrell walked with a slump in his shoulders that could have been grief, but I knew was the crushing weight of a hangover and a guilty conscience. They had spent the flight drinking complimentary bourbon and rehearsing their lie. Now it was showtime. They approached the customs officer at the global entry kiosk. Heather took the lead. She always took the lead. I watched the security footage later with a cold detachment. She was trembling. She clutched a tissue to her nose. "Officer, we need help," she stammered, her voice pitching up into a perfect frequency of distress. "We lost my father-in-law. We were in Mexico for a vacation and he just wandered off at the airport. We looked everywhere. We missed our flight looking for him, but we had to come back. He has dementia. He is confused." The officer looked concerned. He typed notes into his computer. "Did you file a report with the local authorities in Mexico, ma'am?" "Yes." Heather lied without blinking. "We went to the local police. They said they would search the hospitals and shelters, but we had to come home to get his medical records. He needs his medication. Please, if he tries to fly back, if anyone finds him, call us immediately." She wrote down her number. Tyrell stood behind her, nodding mutely. He looked terrified, not because he was worried about me, but because he was terrified of getting caught. But Heather was calm under the surface. She was playing the system. By reporting me missing, she was creating a paper trail. She was establishing a narrative, the confused old man who wandered into the desert. When my body was eventually found, or never found at all, she would have the official documentation to prove she was just a grieving daughter-in-law. They left the airport and hailed an Uber. The moment the car doors closed, the performance ended. The tears dried up instantly. Heather pulled a compact mirror from her purse and fixed her makeup. Tyrell loosened his tie and let out a long breath. "We did it," he whispered. He sounded like he couldn't believe it. "Of course we did it," Heather snapped, checking her reflection. "I told you it would be fine. Nobody cares about a senile old mailman, Tyrell. He's just a number in a system now. By next week he will be a cold case." They arrived at their apartment in Brooklyn. It was a trendy loft with exposed brick walls and high rent that I knew they hadn't paid in 2 months. They walked in, and the first thing Heather did was go to the kitchen and open a bottle of champagne. It was a bottle of Dom Perignon, probably bought on one of the credit cards they had stolen from my wallet months ago. She poured 2 glasses. The cork popped with a festive sound that made my stomach turn. She handed a glass to Tyrell. "To us," she said, raising her glass. "To freedom. To the future." Tyrell took the glass. His hand was shaking. "To us," he echoed, weak and pathetic. They drank. They ordered expensive sushi. They sat on their designer sofa and talked about how they were going to spend my money. They talked about paying off the loan sharks. They talked about buying a new Tesla. They talked about me as if I was already a ghost. He probably didn't even suffer. Heather said, popping a piece of tuna into her mouth. "The heat gets you fast out there. It is like going to sleep. We did him a favor, really. He does not have to worry about being a burden anymore." I sat in the safe house watching the feed, listening to them rationalize my murder. I felt a cold, hard stone settle in my chest where my heart used to be. They were celebrating. They were toasting my death with my own money. "Enjoy the sushi, Tyrell," I thought. "It is the last good meal you are going to have for 20 years. The next morning they woke up with the energy of vultures who had spotted a fresh carcass. It was Monday. The banks were open. The real estate offices were open. It was time to harvest the crop. They dressed in business casual. Heather wore a blazer that made her look efficient and trustworthy. Tyrell wore a polo shirt and slacks. They looked like a young, successful couple ready to handle family business. They drove their leased BMW to Queens. They parked in front of my house. My brownstone, the house I had bought in 1982, the house where I had peeled wallpaper and refinished floors with my own hands. It stood tall and proud on the tree-lined street, the only thing of real value I owned in their eyes. They got out of the car. Heather was carrying a clipboard and a folder of documents. Tyrell was carrying a box of heavy-duty trash bags. They were planning to purge my life. They were going to throw my clothes, my photos, my memories into those bags and leave them on the curb for the garbage truck. They walked up the front steps. Heather reached into her purse and pulled out the key ring she had taken from my nightstand before we left for the trip. She selected the front door key. She slid it into the lock. It didn't turn. She frowned. She jiggled it. She pulled it out and tried again. Nothing. The key did not fit. "What is wrong?" Tyrell asked, standing behind her with the box of trash bags. "It is stuck," Heather muttered. She tried again, jamming the key in with force. "It won't turn." "Let me try," Tyrell said. He took the keys. He tried. He jiggled. He pushed. He pulled. The lock was solid. It was immovable. "That is weird," he said. "This is definitely the right key. I used it last week when I came to water the plants." Heather stepped back and looked at the door. Her eyes narrowed. Then she noticed it. The lock wasn't the old brass deadbolt I had installed 10 years ago. It was new. It was sleek brushed steel with a small digital keypad above the handle. "He changed the locks," she whispered. Her voice was full of confusion. "When did he change the locks?" Tyrell looked at the keypad. "Maybe he did it before the trip," he said, his voice rising in panic. "Maybe he lost his keys and got a digital one. He didn't tell us." Heather snapped. "Why wouldn't he tell us?" They stood there on the stoop, baffled. The house was locked tight, a fortress. They circled around to the back. The back door was the same. New steel-reinforced locks. The windows were shuttered from the inside. "This does not make sense," Heather said, pacing the small backyard. "He is a Luddite. He doesn't use digital locks. He can barely use a smartphone. Who installed this?" "Call a locksmith," Tyrell said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Just call a locksmith. We have the power of attorney paperwork. We can prove we have the right to enter." Heather nodded. She pulled out her phone. She was dialing when a black sedan pulled up to the curb in front of the house. It was a Lincoln Town Car, sleek and polished. The back door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, thin, and dressed in a suit that cost more than Tyrell Carr. He carried a leather briefcase and walked with the precision of a scalpel. It was Arthur Goldman, my attorney, the man who managed the trust they didn't know existed. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice smooth and cold as polished marble. Heather spun around. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to regain her composure. "This is private property." "I am aware of that," the man said, stopping at the gate. "I represent the owner of this estate. My name is Arthur Goldman, and you are trespassing." "Trespassing?" Heather laughed, a sharp bark of a sound. "We are family. I am his daughter-in-law, and this is his son. We are here to check on the house. We have power of attorney." She waved the folder of forged documents in the air. Goldman didn't even blink. He adjusted his glasses and looked at them with a mixture of boredom and pity. "I am afraid those documents are invalid, Mrs. Brooks," he said. "And as for your relation to the owner, that is currently a matter of some debate." "The house has been sealed." "Sealed?" Tyrell asked, stepping forward. "Why?" "Because of a police report," Goldman said. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "A report filed this morning regarding suspicious activity and potential fraud involving the property. The owner contacted my office and instructed me to secure the premises immediately." The owner, Heather's face went white. She looked like she had been slapped. "What do you mean the owner contacted you?" Jeremiah Brooks Goldman said, calm as a winter lake. "He called me. He said there were people trying to sell his home without his permission. He authorized the installation of the new security system remotely." "That is impossible," Heather shrieked, her composure shattered. She took a step toward Goldman, her hands shaking. "You are lying. He could not have called you." "And why is that?" Mrs. Brooks Goldman asked, tilting his head slightly. "Because he is dead," she screamed. The words hung in the humid air of Queens like a guillotine blade. Tyrell gasped. He He grabbed Heather's arm, trying to pull her back, trying to silence her, but it was too late. The words were out. "He is dead," Heather repeated, her eyes wild. "He died in Mexico. He wandered off and died in the desert. There is no way he called you. You are a liar." Goldman smiled. It was a very small, very dangerous smile. "Dead," he repeated slowly, tasting the word. "That is a very specific conclusion to jump to, Mrs. Brooks, considering you filed a missing persons report only yesterday. Usually family members hold on to hope for weeks, months even. But you seem quite certain." Heather realized her mistake. Her mouth snapped shut. Her eyes darted back and forth, looking for an escape, looking for a way to untwist the words she had just vomited up. "I mean, we assume the worst," she stammered. He was confused. "It is dangerous down there. We know he wouldn't survive long." Goldman put the paper back in his briefcase. He snapped the latches shut with a sound like a gunshot. "Well, that is a matter for the authorities," he said. "But as far as this house is concerned, the deed is locked in a blind trust. Even if Mr. Brooks were deceased, the property does not pass to his son. It passes to a charitable foundation. You have no claim here. Not now, not ever." He turned to leave, but paused. "Oh, and Mr. Brooks," he said, looking at Tyrell, "I would suggest you get off the property. The new security system includes silent alarms and cameras with facial recognition. The police are already on their way." He got into his car and drove away, leaving them standing on the sidewalk. Tyrell looked at the house, then at Heather. "A charitable foundation," he whispered. He left it to charity. Heather ignored him. She was staring at the digital lock on the door. Her mind was racing, trying to calculate, trying to find a new angle, but I could see the cracks forming. The panic was setting in. "He called," she muttered to herself. "How could he call? He didn't have a phone. We took his phone. Maybe he found a payphone." Tyrell said, his voice rising in hysteria. "Maybe he isn't dead, Heather. Maybe he is coming back." "Shut up," Heather hissed. "He is dead. He has to be dead. We left him miles from anything. No water, no food. He is dead, Tyrell. This lawyer is just bluffing. He is trying to scare us." She grabbed Tyrell's arm. "We need money," she said, her eyes frantic. "If we cannot sell the house, we need cash now. The loan sharks are coming, Tyrell. We need to pay them something or we are dead too." "What do we do?" Tyrell asked. Heather's eyes lit up with a desperate idea. "The safety deposit box," she said. "Your dad has a box at the bank. He keeps cash there, gold coins. I saw the key once in his desk. He didn't bring it to Mexico. It must still be inside." "But we cannot get inside." Tyrell pointed at the house. Heather smiled, a rictus of greed and fear. "We do not need the key," she said. "We have the power of attorney. We have his social security number. We can go to the bank and claim he lost the key. We can drill the box." "But the lawyer said the power of attorney is invalid," Tyrell argued. "The bank does not know that yet." Heather said, pulling him toward the car. "We have to move fast, before the lawyer calls the bank. Come on." They ran to their car. They were desperate now. They were running on fumes and adrenaline. They thought they had found a lifeline. They thought there was a pot of gold waiting for them in a steel box downtown. I watched them go from the screen in the safe house. I took a sip of water. "Let them go to the bank," I said to Miller, who was sitting next to me. Miller grinned. "You emptied the box, right?" I nodded. "Years ago. There is nothing in there but a lesson." I leaned back in my chair. They were digging their hole deeper and deeper. Breaking into a safety deposit box with forged documents was a federal crime. They were about to cross the point of no return, and I was going to be there to close the lid. The BMW screeched to a halt at a red light in Brooklyn. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with panic and the smell of expensive leather that did not belong to them. From my vantage point in the safe house, I listened to their heavy breathing through the bug in Tyrell's phone. They were arguing. They were always arguing now. But the argument was cut short by a sudden violent crunch of metal. A black SUV had swerved in front of them, blocking the intersection. Another car boxed them in from behind. I watched the GPS dot on my screen stop moving. I switched audio feeds to the external microphone on the button I had left in Tyrell's backpack before the trip. I heard car doors slamming, heavy boots hitting the pavement. "Get out of the car, Tyrell." The voice was deep, gravelly, and terrified me because I recognized it. It belonged to Marcus the Bull Russo. He was a mid-level enforcer for a loan shark syndicate I had investigated 10 years ago. If Tyrell owed money to him, he was not just in debt, he was in a coffin waiting for the lid to close. I heard Heather scream as the driver's side window shattered. Glass rained down on my son. A hand reached in, unlocking the door and dragging Tyrell out onto the street. "Please," Tyrell begged, his voice high and thin like a child's. "I am getting the money, I swear. We are selling the house. You said you would have it today, Tyrell." The bull growled. "You said your old man was gone and the house was sold, but my guys tell me the house is locked up tight and there is a lawyer sniffing around. You lied to me, Tyrell. I do not like liars." "I am not lying," Tyrell sobbed. "There was a delay. Just a paperwork issue. We have the power of attorney. We are going to the bank right now. My dad has a safety deposit box. It is full of cash. Gold, enough to cover everything." I sat forward in my chair. So that was the story. Tyrell had sold them a fantasy about my hidden wealth to buy himself time. He did not know that the only thing in that box was a mirror for his own soul. The bull paused. "How much is in the box?" 200,000, Tyrell lied. "Maybe more. He saved his whole life. He did not trust banks with digital money. It is all there. Cash." Heather's voice cut in, sharp and desperate from the passenger seat. "We are going there right now. Follow us. We will hand it over today. Just let him go." There was a long silence. I could hear the traffic honking around them, indifferent to the violence unfolding in the middle of the street. "You have 1 hour," the bull said. "If you do not come out of that bank with my money, I am going to take your wife as collateral. And Tyrell, you do not want to know what we do with collateral that stops being useful." The car door slammed shut. Tires squealed as the SUV sped away. Inside the BMW, there was only the sound of Tyrell weeping and Heather hyperventilating. "Drive," Heather snapped, her voice trembling but vicious. "Stop crying and drive. We have to get to the bank before they change their minds." They sped toward downtown. I looked at Miller. He was already on the phone with the bank manager. "Let them in," I told Miller. "Do not stop them at the door. Let them drill the box. Let them see it." Miller nodded and spoke into his headset. The stage was set. They arrived at First National Bank 20 minutes later. They looked like a wreck. Tyrell had a cut on his cheek from the glass. Heather's hair was disheveled. But they walked with a manic purpose. They marched up to the customer service desk. Heather did the talking as always. She slammed a folder of documents onto the marble counter. "We need to access safety deposit box 402, she demanded. "The account holder is Jeremiah Brooks. I am his daughter-in-law. This is his son. We have power of attorney." The bank manager, Mr. Henderson, adjusted his glasses. He was part of the play now. He looked at the documents. They were forgeries, good ones, but still fake. The signature at the bottom was a shaky imitation of my own. Heather had practiced it 100 times. I had found scraps of paper in the trash weeks ago with my name written over and over again. "I see," Mr. Henderson said slowly. "And where is Mr. Brooks? Usually the account holder must be present." "He is indisposed," Heather lied smoothly. "He is in a medical facility. He lost the key. We need to access the box immediately to pay for his care. It is an emergency. Medical care. They were using my life as an excuse to rob me. Since you do not have the key, we will have to drill the lock," Mr. Henderson said. "There is a fee of $300. We will pay it," Heather said, pulling out a credit card. "My credit card. Just open the box." Mr. Henderson nodded. "Follow me." They walked into the vault. The air was cool and smelled of steel and old paper. The walls were lined with hundreds of silver boxes, each one a tiny coffin for secrets. Box 402 was at eye level. A locksmith was waiting. The sound of the drill was deafening in the small space. It whined and ground against the metal, screaming like a dying animal. Tyrell was pacing behind Heather, wiping sweat from his forehead. "It has to be there," he whispered. "It has to be there, Heather. If it is empty, we are dead." "It is not empty," Heather hissed. "I saw the key in his desk years ago. He is a hoarder. He does not spend money. It all has to be in there." I watched the feed from the hidden camera inside the vault. I remembered the day I rented that box 30 years ago. I used to keep backup identities there, passports, cash, emergency protocols. But when I retired, I cleared it out. I kept it for only one reason: a dead drop. A place to leave a message if I ever needed to disappear. I never thought the message would be for my own son. The drill punched through the lock. The metal door swung open. Mr. Henderson stepped back. "The box is open. I will give you some privacy." He left the room, closing the heavy gate behind him. Heather lunged forward. She grabbed the long metal tray and yanked it out. Her hands were shaking so hard she almost dropped it. She placed it on the table. Tyrell crowded in next to her, his eyes wide and hungry. "Open it," he begged. Open it! Heather lifted the lid. Time seemed to stop. The camera zoomed in. The box was empty. No stacks of cash, no gold coins, no jewelry, just a single sheet of white paper folded neatly in the center of the cold metal tray. Heather stared at it. Her brain could not process the lack of money. She reached in and patted the bottom of the tray as if the gold were invisible, as if she could conjure it into existence by sheer will. "No," she whispered. "No, it cannot be." She grabbed the paper. She unfolded it. Her eyes scanned the words. I knew exactly what it said. I had written it the night before I let them take me to the airport. What is the value of a father? Is it the price of a house? Is it a first-class ticket? Is it a gambling debt? You sold me for nothing, Tyrell, and now you have nothing left. Heather screamed. It was not a scream of fear. It was a scream of pure primal rage. She crumpled the paper and threw it across the room. She grabbed the metal tray and slammed it against the wall. He knew she shrieked. Her voice echoed off the steel walls. He knew the whole time. He played us. That old bastard played us. Tyrell sank to his knees. He looked broken. He looked like a man who had just realized the sky was falling. "We are dead," he moaned, covering his face with his hands. "The bull is going to kill us. We are dead, Heather." Heather turned on him. Her face was twisted into a mask of hatred. She started hitting him, pounding her fists against his shoulders, his head, his chest. "You told me there was money," she screamed. "You said he was rich. You said he was hiding it. You useless idiot. You killed us." Tyrell did not fight back. He just took the beating, sobbing like a child. I watched them turn on each other. The rats were trapped in the cage and they were starting to eat their own. I signaled Miller. "Call the police," I said. "Tell them we have an active break-in and forgery in progress at First National, and tell them the suspects are dangerous." Miller picked up the phone. The trap had snapped shut. They had broken into a federal bank using forged documents. They had committed fraud on camera, and now they had no money to pay the men waiting outside. I leaned back in my chair. The justice system would take it from here, but the real punishment was already happening in that vault. They were alone with their failure. They were alone with the truth of what they were. And for the first time in their miserable lives, they had no one to blame but themselves. "Let them sit there for a while," I said, watching Heather slide down the wall. Her expensive blazer ruined her face streaked with mascara tears. Let them feel the walls closing in. It was time for the final act. Time to rise from the dead. The heavy oak doors of St. Jude Baptist Church were thick enough to muffle the sounds of the Queen's traffic outside, but they could not block the stench of hypocrisy coming from the pulpit. I stood in the shadows of the vestibule adjusting the cuffs of my bespoke Italian suit. It was a suit I hadn't worn in 15 years, a relic from a life Tyrell didn't know existed. Beside me, Agent Miller checked his watch and gave me a curt nod. We were right on time. Inside the sanctuary, my son was in the middle of the performance of his life. I cracked the door open just an inch to listen. The church was packed. Neighbors, postal colleagues, people I had known for 40 years sat in the pews, dabbing their eyes with tissues. In the front row sat Marcus the Bull Russo. He wasn't crying. He was watching Tyrell like a hawk, watching a mouse, ensuring his investment was secure. Tyrell stood at the podium, clutching a crumpled piece of paper, his hands trembling in a way that the audience likely mistook for grief, but I knew was pure, unadulterated terror. My father was a simple man. Tyrell choked out his voice, cracking perfectly on the last syllable. He loved his job. He loved his routine. When we took him to Mexico, we just wanted to give him one last great adventure. We never imagined he would wander off. We never imagined the heat would take him from us so soon. He paused to wipe a fake tear. Beside him, Heather sat dressed in a modest black dress that she had probably bought with my credit card. She had her head bowed, her shoulders shaking with simulated sobs. It was a masterclass in deception. They had organized this memorial service in record time. Usually you wait weeks or months for a missing person to be declared dead, but they had pushed for an emergency declaration citing my age and medical condition. They needed that death certificate. They needed the $50,000 life insurance policy payout immediately because the bull was sitting 10 feet away and his patience had run out. We searched for days, Tyrell continued, his voice gaining strength as he sold the lie. We screamed his name until our voices were gone. But the desert is vast. The police told us there was no hope. We came home with heavy hearts, but we know he is in a better place now. He is resting. He is at peace. I watched Mrs. Higgins, my next-door neighbor, nod sympathetically. She believed him. Everyone believed him. They saw a grieving son. They didn't see a desperate gambler who had left his father to die of thirst in the Baja dust. They didn't see the monster who had tried to drill open a safety deposit box only to find his own judgment waiting for him. And now Tyrell said, looking directly at the bull, "We just want to honor his memory. We want to move forward and settle his affairs quickly, just as he would have wanted. We ask for your prayers as we navigate this financial and emotional hardship." He was begging. He wasn't talking to God. He was talking to the loan shark, asking for a few more days until the insurance check cleared. It was pathetic. It was disgusting. And it was over. I looked at Miller. Now I said. Miller signaled the two uniformed officers standing by the entrance. They grabbed the heavy iron handles of the double doors. "Open them," I commanded. The doors swung open with a boom that echoed like thunder through the silent church. A shaft of bright afternoon sunlight cut through the dim interior, blinding the people in the back rows. The organ player stopped mid-chord, creating a jarring dissonance that hung in the air. I stepped into the light. I was not using my cane. I was not stooped. I walked with the stride of a man who had commanded rooms far more dangerous than this one. My polished shoes clicked rhythmically against the marble floor. Click, 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 a metronome counting down the seconds of their freedom. A collective gasp swept through the room, starting from the back and rolling forward like a wave. People turned around, eyes widened, jaws dropped. Mrs. Higgins let out a small shriek and clutched her chest. I kept walking, staring straight ahead at the altar where my son stood frozen. Tyrell looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His face went gray. The paper in his hands fluttered to the floor. He gripped the podium so hard I thought the wood might splinter. He wasn't looking at a father. He was looking at a ghost. He was looking at a dead man walking who had come to drag him down to hell. Heather's head snapped up. Her eyes locked onto me, and for a second her brain simply refused to process the data. I saw the gears turning. She had left me in the desert. She had seen the dust clouds swallow me. She knew I had no water. She knew I had no phone. In her mind, I was a corpse rotting in the sun. The silence in the church was absolute. No one breathed. No one moved. The only sound was my footsteps approaching the altar. I walked past the bull. He looked at me, then he looked at Tyrell, and a slow, dark smile spread across his face. He knew the game was up. He knew he wasn't getting paid. He sat back to enjoy the show. I reached the front of the church. I stopped 5 feet from my son. I looked him up and down, taking in the cheap suit, the sweat on his brow, the terror in his eyes. "Hello, Tyrell," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room without a microphone. That was a beautiful speech. I almost believed it myself. Tyrell's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked at the congregation, then back at me. He was looking for an exit, but there were federal agents blocking the doors. Heather screamed. It wasn't a word at first, just a high-pitched sound of pure primal fear. She scrambled backward, knocking over her chair. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "Ghost!" She shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "He is a ghost. He is dead. We left him. We left him there." The congregation murmured. The mask was slipping. She had just admitted they left me. I turned my gaze to her. She looked small and vicious, huddled on the floor in her black dress. "I am not a ghost, Heather," I said coldly. "I am a man who survived my own family." I walked up the 3 steps to the platform. Tyrell stumbled back, tripping over his own feet and falling onto the carpet. He crawled away from me, crab walking backward until he hit the altar rail. He looked pathetic. I stepped up to the podium. I adjusted the microphone. I looked out at the sea of faces, my friends, my neighbors, the people who had pitied me for being a lonely old mailman. "I am sorry to interrupt this service," I said, my voice steady and commanding, "but reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated by the people who tried to cause it." I looked down at Tyrell. "You told them I wandered off, son. You told them the heat took me. Why do you not tell them the truth? Why do you not tell them about the Jeep? Why do you not tell them about the one-way ticket?" "Pop, please." Tyrell whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Please do not do this." "You did this," I replied. "You bought the ticket, Tyrell. You drove the car. You chose the desert over your own father." Heather scrambled to her feet. Her eyes were wild. She realized the narrative was collapsing. She realized her life was over. "He is lying," she screamed at the crowd. "He is senile. He has dementia. He does not know what he is saying. He is sick." I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out the small black button Miller had sewn onto my coat. I held it up. "Is this dementia, Heather?" I asked. "Or is this a federal wiretap?" I pressed play on the audio system Miller had connected to the church speakers. The sound was crystal clear. "Then he dies," Heather's voice boomed through the church. "He is 70 years old, Tyrell. He has lived his life. I am not waiting 10 years. I want my life now. Sang mai vutlau rasamak." The gasps from the crowd turned into cries of horror. Mrs. Higgins covered her mouth. The pastor looked like he was going to faint. The bull chuckled softly in the front row. I stopped the recording. I looked at Heather. She was shaking her head, mouthing the word "no" over and over again. "I am not dead," I said, my voice hard as iron. "But your conscience is. You killed it a long time ago. You sold it for a house you didn't own and money you didn't earn." I stepped down from the podium. I stood over them, my shadow stretching long across the floor. "You wanted an inheritance," I said. "You wanted a legacy. Well, here it is." I nodded to Miller. "Do it." The doors opened again, but this time it wasn't sunlight that entered. It was justice. 6 uniformed officers marched in handcuffs, gleaming. Tyrell began to sob. Heather looked around for a way out, but there was nowhere to go. The walls of the church had become the walls of a prison. I watched as they were pulled to their feet. I watched as the cuffs were snapped onto their wrists. I felt nothing. No joy, no sadness. Just the cold satisfaction of a balance sheet finally zeroing out. They thought I was a helpless old man. They thought I was prey. They forgot that before you hunt the wolf, you better make sure he doesn't have teeth. And I had just bitten back. Tyrell scrambled to his feet on the altar carpet, his movements jerky and desperate like a marionette with tangled strings. He looked at the federal agents blocking the doors, then he looked at the congregation watching him with wide, confused eyes, and finally, he looked at me. I could see the gears grinding in his panic-stricken mind. He realized there was no escape route, no back door, and no way to outrun the law. So he did the only thing a coward knows how to do. He tried to hide behind a lie one last time. He wiped the snot and tears from his face with the sleeve of his cheap suit and forced a smile that looked like a rictus of pain. He opened his arms wide and lunged toward me. "Dad," he sobbed, his voice pitching up into a theatrical wail of relief. "Oh God, Dad, you are alive. I thought I lost you. I thought I would never see you again. It is a miracle. A true miracle." He threw himself at me, aiming for a hug that he hoped would look like a reunion to the watching crowd. He wanted to wrap his arms around me, to bury his face in my shoulder, to make it look like we were a grieving father and son reunited by Providence. He wanted to use my body as a shield against the truth. He thought if he held me tight enough, if he cried loud enough, the neighbors would believe his tears were real. He thought he could spin this into a story about a confused old man finding his way home and a loving son welcoming him back with open arms. I did not move. I did not step back. I simply raised my right hand and placed it flat against the center of his chest, stopping him cold. The impact was solid. He froze, his arms still outstretched, his fake smile faltering. I looked him in the eye. I saw the dilation of his pupils. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. I saw the terrified child who used to hide behind my leg when it thundered, but that child was dead. The man standing in front of me was a stranger who had left me to die in the dirt. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice low and dangerous, projecting clearly in the silent church. "Do not dare touch me with those dirty hands." Tyrell flinched as if I had slapped him. He tried to push past my hand, desperate to complete the embrace to sell the lie. "Dad, please," he whispered frantically so only I could hear. "Just hug me. We can fix this. I will explain everything later. Just play along. For the family." "For the family," I repeated, my voice rising. "You destroyed this family the moment you bought a one-way ticket. You killed this family when you drove away and left me standing in the dust. There is nothing to fix, Tyrell. There is only what you broke." I shoved him backward. He stumbled his heels, catching on the carpet, and he fell hard onto his backside. The congregation gasped. To them, it looked like a father rejecting his son. They were confused. They wanted a happy ending. They wanted the hug. I needed to show them why there would be no hug. I needed to show them the rot beneath the floorboards. I looked at Miller. He was standing by the sound system holding a tablet connected to the church speakers. He gave me a nod. "You want to tell them how much you missed me, Tyrell?" I asked, looking down at my son. "You want to tell them how hard you looked? Let us hear how hard you looked." I signaled Miller. "Play it." The speakers crackled to life. The static hiss filled the vaulted ceiling of the church, followed by the unmistakable sound of a cheap motel air conditioner humming in the background. Then Heather's voice cut through the silence, sharp and clear. "We cannot wait another day, Tyrell. He is smelling up the room. He is asking questions. We need to do it tomorrow." The congregation shifted in the pews. They recognized the voice. Heather went pale, her hands flying to her mouth. Then Tyrell's voice came through the speakers. It sounded weak whining. "But what if someone sees us? What if he finds his way back?" Heather laughed on the recording. A cruel, dismissive sound. "He is not finding his way back from where we are going. We drive him out to the preservation zone. We tell him to get out for a bathroom break. And we leave. Simple." No, Tyrell screamed from the floor. "Turn it off. Stop it." But the recording continued, and then what Tyrell's voice asked. "Then we go back to the hotel," Heather said. "We pack up. We check out. We tell the front desk he wandered off. We act sad. We cry a little. We report him missing to the local police. By the time anyone starts looking seriously, we will be back in Queens selling the house." The audio shifted, the sound of a car engine roaring, the crunch of tires on gravel. "Get out!" Jeremiah Heather's voice shouted. "Go behind those rocks!" Then the sound of a car door slamming, the sound of an engine revving. "Go, Tyrell, drive," Heather shouted. "But he is still standing there," Tyrell said. "I said drive, you idiot," Heather screamed. "Leave him. Voot lau ja radung baukansat di lac. Dump the old man on the street, report him missing to the police." "Okay," Tyrell's voice said, breathless and terrified. "Okay, doing it fast." The sound of the Jeep speeding away faded into silence. The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the silence of a room full of people realizing they had been mourning a murder victim while sitting next to the murderers. I looked at the crowd. My cousin Sarah was in the third row. She had her hand over her heart, her mouth open in horror. Mr. Henderson, the local grocer, looked like he was going to be sick. The pastor, who had just delivered a sermon about Tyrell devotion, was gripping the pulpit, his knuckles white. They turned. It started with Sarah. She stood up, her face set in a mask of disgust. She turned her back on the altar. Then Mr. Henderson stood up and turned around. Then the neighbors. One by one, row by row, the congregation rose and turned their backs on Tyrell and Heather. It was a wave of rejection, a silent verdict. They were shunning them. They were casting them out of the community, out of the tribe. Tyrell looked around frantically. "Aunt Sarah." "Please," he begged, scrambling to his knees. "It is not what it sounds like. It was a misunderstanding. We were going back. We were going to go back for him." Sarah did not turn around. She did not speak. She simply walked toward the exit, her head held high. Heather was not begging. She was staring at the floor, her eyes vacant. She knew the game was over. She knew the social capital she had spent years building was gone. She was a pariah. In the front row, Marcus, the bull Russo, stood up. He adjusted his silk tie. He looked at Tyrell with eyes that were dead and cold. He didn't turn his back. He just shook his head slowly, a gesture that said, "You are bad for business." He walked down the center aisle, pushing past the stunned mourners, leaving the sinking ship. Tyrell watched him go, and I saw the true fear enter his eyes. The bull leaving meant Tyrell had no protection. It meant the debts were due, and he had no way to pay. "Officers," I said, my voice breaking the spell. "Secure the room." The doors at the back of the church opened again. This time it wasn't just 2 officers, it was a tactical team. Armored vests, badges flashing. They moved in with precision, lining the walls, blocking every exit. Tyrell tried to stand, but his legs gave out. He collapsed back onto the carpet, sobbing into his hands. "Why, Pop," he wailed. "Why did you have to do this here? Why did you have to humiliate us?" I walked down the steps of the altar until I was standing over him. I leaned down close enough to smell the cheap cologne he used to mask the scent of his fear. "Because you didn't just try to kill me, Tyrell," I whispered. "You tried to erase me. You tried to turn my life into a lie. You wanted a memorial service. You wanted a tragedy. Well, you got one. But the tragedy isn't my death. It is your life." I stood up and signaled the officers. "Get them out of my sight." 2 officers grabbed Tyrell by the arms and hauled him up. He was deadweight, dragging his feet, screaming for mercy, screaming for a lawyer, screaming for his mother, who was lucky enough to be in her grave so she didn't have to see this. 2 other officers went for Heather. She didn't scream, she didn't fight. She stood up with a strange, robotic stiffness. She held out her wrists for the handcuffs. As they led her past me, she stopped. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw something other than greed or hate in her eyes. I saw respect, the respect of a predator who realizes they attacked the wrong prey. "You are not a mailman," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "I am a father, and I just finished my job." They dragged them out the side door into the waiting police vans. The sirens wailed to life, cutting through the afternoon air. The congregation began to file out, whispering, shaking their heads, avoiding my gaze, not out of judgment, but out of awe. They looked at me differently now. I wasn't Jeremiah, the old mail carrier, anymore. I was something else, something dangerous. I stood alone at the altar. The church was empty now except for Miller. He walked up to me and handed me a bottle of water. "You okay, boss?" he asked. I took a long drink. The water was cool and clean. "I am fine, Miller," I said. I looked at the empty pews. I looked at the stained glass windows. I looked at the cross hanging above the pulpit. "I am better than fine," I said, adjusting my jacket. "I am free." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The dead weight was gone. The parasites were gone. I had burned down the house to kill the rats, but the foundation was still standing. And it was strong. The fluorescent lights of the police precinct interrogation room hummed with a sound that drilled straight into the skull. It was a stark contrast to the warm wood and stained glass of the church where Tyrell and Heather had been arrested just hours before. Now they were separated from the outside world by cinder block walls and a one-way mirror. They sat on opposite sides of a metal table, handcuffed to a steel bar bolted to the floor. Heather had stopped screaming. She was staring at the wall, her face a mask of smeared mascara and ruined ambition. Tyrell was shaking his leg, bouncing nervously, the metal of his cuffs clinking against the table in a steady, maddening rhythm. The heavy door buzzed and swung open. Tyrell looked up, hope flaring in his eyes for a brief second. He expected a public defender, or maybe a miracle. Instead, Arthur Goldman walked in. The lawyer looked out of place in the grimy precinct. His suit was immaculate, his shoes shined to a mirror finish, and his briefcase looked like it cost more than the bail bond Tyrell couldn't afford. He didn't sit down. He stood at the end of the table, placing his briefcase on the surface with a deliberate heavy thud. Mr. Goldman Tyrell stammered, his voice raspy from crying. "You are here. Did my dad send you? Is he dropping the charges? Please tell me he is dropping the charges. We can fix this." Heather's head snapped up. Her eyes narrowed. She saw the expensive suit and she smelled money. Her survival instinct kicked in, overriding her fear. "You are the lawyer from the house," she said, her voice sharp. "You represent Jeremiah. Look, this is all a huge misunderstanding. A domestic dispute that got out of hand. If you get us out of here, we can sign whatever you want. We can sign away the house. We just want to go home." Goldman looked at them with an expression of mild distaste, as if he had stepped in something unpleasant on the sidewalk. He adjusted his silk tie and opened his briefcase. "I am not here to get you out, Mrs. Brooks," Goldman said, his voice smooth and cold. "And I am certainly not here to negotiate. I am here as a courtesy to my client, Mr. Jeremiah Brooks. He wanted to ensure that you fully understood the magnitude of the mistake you made today. He wanted full disclosure before the district attorney locks you away for the next 2 decades. He pulled out a thick document bound in blue leather. It wasn't a lawsuit, it wasn't a restraining order, it was a portfolio. "You thought you were killing an old mailman for a $2 million house in Queens," Goldman said, sliding the document across the table toward them. "You thought that was the prize. You thought that was the finish line." Tyrell looked at the folder confused. "It is just a house," he muttered. "It is all he has." Goldman let out a short, dry laugh. It was a sound devoid of humor. "Jeremiah Brooks worked for the National Security Agency for 30 years, Goldman said. "He wasn't sorting mail, Tyrell. He was hunting money launderers. He was dismantling financial networks for cartels in rogue states. And during that time, he was also an investor, a very early investor." Heather reached out with her free hand and flipped open the cover of the portfolio. Her eyes scanned the first page, then the second. Her breathing stopped. Her hand froze midair. "What is this?" she whispered. That, Goldman said, pointing to a line item, is a founding equity stake in a cybersecurity firm called Sentinel Systems. Your father-in-law bought those shares in 1998 when the company was operating out of a garage. Today they are the primary contractor for the Department of Defense. He turned the page. And this is a commercial real estate holding company. Warehouses, data centers, logistics hubs, properties that are not flashy but are essential to the global supply chain. Jeremiah bought the land when it was dirt cheap. Now it generates a passive income of $40,000 a month. Tyrell leaned over, trying to read the numbers upside down. His eyes widened until they looked like they might pop out of his head. $40,000 a month, he choked out. But he drives a 20-year-old Ford. He clips coupons. Goldman leaned in closer, his face inches from Tyrell. He clips coupons because he knows the value of $1, Goldman said. He drives a Ford because he doesn't need a BMW to feel like a man. He lived simply to protect you, Tyrell. He didn't want you growing up as a trust fund brat. He wanted you to build your own character. He was waiting for what, Heather asked, her voice trembling. Waiting for you to grow up, Goldman replied. The trust was set up to trigger on your 35th birthday, Tyrell, or upon the birth of his first grandchild. It was all going to be yours. The portfolio, the income, the empire. Goldman flipped to the final page. It was a balance sheet. At the bottom was a number in bold black ink. Total net worth $15,400,000. The room went silent. The hum of the lights seemed to roar. $15 million. Heather stared at the number. She blinked, trying to make it change, trying to make it smaller, but the ink remained. 15 million. She had tried to murder a man for a fraction of that amount. She had treated a multimillionaire like a stray dog. She had thrown away a winning lottery ticket because she didn't like the way the paper felt. No, she whispered. No, that is not possible. He is a mailman. He is a nobody. He is the man who is going to hand you the keys to the kingdom, Goldman said, mercilessly. All you had to do was treat him with basic human decency. All you had to do was buy him a bottle of water on a plane. All you had to do was not leave him to die in a desert. Goldman closed the folder and pulled it back. But you failed the test, he said. And because you failed, the trust has been dissolved. As of this morning, the assets have been transferred. Transferred where, Tyrell asked, his voice barely a squeak. To a foundation, Goldman said. The Silver Shield Foundation. It is dedicated to hunting down people who prey on the elderly. Your inheritance, Tyrell, is going to be used to put people like you in prison. The reality hit Heather like a physical blow. She didn't just lose the house. She lost the life she had hallucinated about. The private jets, the jewelry, the status. It had been right there sitting across from her at the dinner table wearing a cardigan and asking for salt. And she had spat on it. She started to scream. It wasn't a scream of fear this time. It was a scream of pure materialistic agony. She lunged at the table, straining against her handcuffs, clawing at the empty space where the portfolio had been. You give that back, she shrieked. That is ours. We are family. He cannot do this. He cannot give $15 million to charity. I earned that money. I put up with his stories. I put up with his smell. I earned it. Goldman looked at her with cold amusement. You earned 20 years in a federal penitentiary, Mrs. Brooks, he said. That is what you earned. Heather turned on Tyrell. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure hatred. She looked like a demon. You idiot, she screamed, spitting in his face. You stupid, useless idiot. You told me he was broke. You told me the house was everything. We could have waited. We could have just waited. $15 million, Tyrell. We could have had it all. I didn't know, Tyrell sobbed, shrinking away from her. He never told me. How was I supposed to know? You should have known, she yelled, kicking him under the table. He is your father. You should have known who he was. But you are so pathetic you didn't even see the gold mine sitting in your living room. You killed us, Tyrell. You threw away $15 million because you owed $200,000 to a loan shark. You are the stupidest man on earth. Tyrell looked at Goldman, then at the wall, then at his hands. The weight of his stupidity was crushing him. He realized now that every time he had lied, every time he had stolen a $20 bill from his father's wallet, every time he had rolled his eyes at his father's advice, he had been chipping away at a diamond. He would have given it to me, Tyrell whispered, the realization dawning on him with the force of a train wreck. If I had just told him about the debt, If I had just asked for help, he would have written a check. Goldman nodded. Yes, he would have. He loved you, Tyrell. He would have paid off your debts in a heartbeat. He would have bought you a house. He would have sent your kids to college. All he wanted was your respect. But you decided it was easier to kill him. Tyrell put his head on the table and began to wail. It was a sound of absolute despair, the sound of a man who realizes he has traded a kingdom for a handful of dust. Goldman picked up his briefcase. He adjusted his cuffs. Well, I think my work here is done, he said. Enjoy your stay. I understand the federal amenities are quite sparse, but you should be used to that by now, given how you treated your father. Wait! Heather screamed as Goldman turned to the door. Wait. Tell him I am sorry. Tell him I didn't mean it. It was Tyrell. Tyrell forced me. I can testify against him. I can help you find the loan sharks. Just get me a deal, please. I cannot go to prison knowing I lost $15 million. Goldman paused at the door. He looked back at her. Mrs. Brooks, he said. Jeremiah asked me to give you a message if you begged. What is it? She asked, desperate hope flaring in her eyes. What did he say? He said. Goldman paused, letting the words hang in the air. He said you should have bought the return ticket. Goldman walked out. The heavy metal door slammed shut with a final resounding clang. Inside the room, the screaming started again. Heather was cursing Tyrell, cursing the world, cursing the money she would never touch. Tyrell was sobbing, rocking back and forth, murmuring 15 million over and over again like a mantra of madness. I watched from the monitor in the viewing room next door. Miller stood beside me. That was brutal, Miller said quietly. It was necessary, I replied. They needed to know what they lost. They needed to know that their greed didn't just cost them their freedom. It cost them a fortune. I looked at Tyrell one last time. He looked small, broken. Come on, Miller, I said, turning away from the glass. I have a plane to catch, a real one this time. Where to? Miller asked. Italy, I said. I hear the coffee is better there. And I have $15 million to enjoy. I think it is time I started spending my retirement fund. We walked out of the precinct, leaving the screams of my former family locked behind concrete and steel. They had built their own hell brick by brick, lie by lie. I was just the one who turned on the light so they could see it. The interrogation room smelled of stale coffee and desperation, a scent I had become intimately familiar with during my 30 years at the agency. I stood behind the one-way glass watching the monitors that displayed two separate rooms. In room 1 sat Heather. In room 2 sat Tyrell. They had been separated for less than an hour, and the love story of the century was already dissolving into a puddle of toxic sludge. Heather was leaning forward across the metal table, her eyes wide and innocent, her voice trembling with a practiced fragility. She looked at the detective and dabbed at her dry eyes. You have to understand, detective, she said, her voice soft and pleading. I am a victim here. Tyrell has a gambling problem, a severe one. He owes money to terrible people. He told me that if we did not get rid of Jeremiah, the loan sharks were going to kill me. He threatened me. He said he would hurt me if I did not drive the car. I was terrified. I just did what he told me to do. I wanted to call the police, but he took my phone. I watched her spin the narrative, weaving a tapestry of lies where she was the helpless hostage and my weak, spineless son was the mastermind. It was impressive in its audacity. She was willing to send her husband to prison for life if it meant she could walk away with a probation deal. She described Tyrell as violent, as controlling as a monster who had forced her to abandon a sweet old man in the desert. I shifted my gaze to the second monitor. Tyrell was hunched over, hugging himself, rocking back and forth. He looked like a child who had broken a window and was waiting for the belt. It was her idea, Tyrell sobbed, his snot dripping onto the table. It was all her idea. She found the place in Mexico. She bought the tickets. She printed the fake reservation. I told her I could not do it. I told her he was my dad, but she slapped me. She said I was not a man. She said if I did not do it, she would leave me and take everything. She drove the Jeep detective. She was the one who told him to get out. I just wanted to go home. The detective in Tyrell room leaned back, crossing his arms. So you are saying your wife masterminded the kidnapping and attempted murder of a federal asset? Yes, Tyrell cried, nodding frantically. Yes, she is the devil. I hate her. I wish I had never met her. She ruined my life. She made me kill my dad. Well, try to kill him. I love my dad. I would never hurt him. She made me do it. I turned away from the monitors, feeling a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with my age. There it was, the truth of their marriage. It wasn't built on love or partnership. It was built on mutual parasitism. They were two ticks attached to the same dog, and now that the dog was biting back, they were trying to detach and feed on each other. They destroyed each other in under 45 minutes, I said to Miller. It usually takes the cartels a few days to break. My family did it before lunch. Miller nodded, his face grim. They are trying to save their own skins, boss. But they do not realize the hole they are digging is not for one person. It is a grave for two. Miller straightened his jacket and picked up a thick file folder. It was time to escalate. The local police had had their turn. Now the heavy artillery was moving in. I followed Miller into the hallway. We walked to Heather interrogation room first. Miller didn't knock. He opened the door and walked in with the swagger of a man who holds all the aces. He slammed the file onto the table, making Heather jump. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to regain her composure. "I am talking to Detective Rodriguez. I was cutting a deal." Miller ignored her. He pulled out a badge and flashed it. It wasn't a local badge. It was federal. "I am Special Agent Miller with Homeland Security," he announced. "And Detective Rodriguez is out of the picture. This is no longer a domestic dispute, Mrs. Brooks. This is not a local kidnapping case." Heather laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Homeland Security? For what? We went to Mexico for a vacation. My father-in-law got lost. Even if you think we left him there, that is a Mexican problem. You have no jurisdiction." Miller smiled, a cold, predatory grin that I had taught him years ago. "Actually, Mrs. Brooks, we have all the jurisdiction. You see, when you transport a U.S. citizen across international borders with the intent to abandon, harm, or exploit them, you are not just breaking state law. You are violating Title 18 of the United States Code. That is human trafficking, Mrs. Brooks." Heather's face went slack. Trafficking. Miller opened the folder. He pulled out photos of the cartel-run facility they had booked. He pulled out the transcripts of the wiretap. He pulled out the financial records showing the transfer of funds across borders. "You took a vulnerable elderly citizen out of the country under false pretenses," Miller continued, his voice hammering down on her like a judge gavel. "You stripped him of his identification. You deprived him of his means of communication. And then you abandoned him in a hostile environment. That is international kidnapping. That is conspiracy to commit murder on foreign soil. And because you used the internet to book the tickets and the banking system to fund the trip, you also committed wire fraud and money laundering." Heather shook her head, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. No, that is too much. It was just a family thing. We just wanted the house. And that," Miller interrupted, "is the cherry on top. Financial exploitation of the elderly. But because you crossed a border to do it, the federal sentencing guidelines are mandatory. There is no parole in the federal system, Mrs. Brooks. You serve 85% of your time. And for these charges, we are looking at a minimum of 20 years. 20 years. The words hit her like a physical blow. She slumped in her chair, the fight draining out of her. "But I am young," she whispered. "I have a life." "Not anymore," Miller said, closing the folder. "You traded your life for a house in Queens." We left Heather's room and went to Tyrell. Miller repeated the speech. Tyrell reacted differently. He didn't argue. He didn't try to negotiate. He just started screaming. A primal sound of terror. He realized that the federal government does not care about gambling debts or domineering wives. The federal government is a machine, and he had just thrown himself into the gears. I watched from the hallway as my son curled into a fetal position on the floor of the interrogation room. I felt a pang of phantom pain in my chest. I remembered holding him when he was a baby, promising to protect him from the world. I had failed. I had protected him from everything except himself. Miller came out of the room. He looked tired. "It is done, boss," he said. "They are being processed now. The U.S. attorney is taking the case personally. They are going away for a long time." I nodded, leaning on my cane, even though I didn't need it. It was a habit, now a comfort. "Good," I said. "Make sure they are in separate facilities. I do not want them comforting each other. I want them to be alone with what they did." We walked toward the exit of the precinct. The lobby was crowded with lawyers, reporters, and police officers. As we pushed through the doors, a man in an expensive suit blocked our path. He looked frantic, sweating through his silk shirt. It was Heather's defense attorney, a man named Sterling who was known for getting rich criminals off on technicalities. "Mr. Brooks," he said, breathless, rushing up to me. "Mr. Brooks, please wait." Miller stepped in front of me, blocking the man path. "Step back, counsel." Sterling held up his hands, palms out. "I am not here to fight. I just want a word with your client. Just 1 minute, please. It is a matter of mercy." I signaled Miller to stand down. I looked at Sterling. "You have 1 minute," I said. Sterling wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. "Look, Mr. Brooks, my client. Heather, she is distraught. She knows she made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But she is young. She was under a lot of pressure. She is willing to sign away any claim to your estate. She is willing to divorce your son. She just wants a chance." "A chance for what?" I asked, my voice flat. "A chance to avoid federal prison," Sterling said, lowering his voice. "Look, if you refuse to cooperate with the prosecution, if you say you forgive them, say it was a misunderstanding, the U.S. attorney might drop the charges down to misdemeanors. She is begging you, Mr. Brooks. She is asking for your forgiveness. She says you are a man of God. She says you know what it is like to make mistakes." I looked at this man, this merchant of excuses. He was trying to sell me on the idea that Heather was a victim of circumstance. He was trying to weaponize my own morality against me. "She wants forgiveness?" I asked. "Yes," Sterling said, nodding eagerly. "She wants to apologize to your face. She wants to make it right." I looked past him at the holding cells where my former family was being fingerprinted and photographed. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "you tell your client that I am indeed a religious man. I believe in judgment. I believe in reaping what you sow." But Sir Sterling interrupted. "She is your daughter-in-law." "She was my daughter-in-law," I corrected him. "Now she is just a number in the federal prison system. And as for forgiveness, tell her that the man she is looking for, the kind, gentle old mailman named Jeremiah Brooks, died in the Baja Desert 3 days ago. He died of thirst and heartbreak." I stepped closer, my eyes boring into his. "The man standing in front of you is not Jeremiah Brooks. I am the consequences of her actions, and consequences do not forgive." Sterling's mouth hung open. He had no argument for that. He stepped aside, defeated. I walked out of the precinct into the bright afternoon sun. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like justice. I checked my watch. I had a flight to catch. This time I had bought the ticket myself, and this time it was round trip. But for Tyrell and Heather, the journey was just beginning, and their destination was a small concrete room with no view and no exit. They had wanted a one-way ticket. They finally got one. The federal courtroom smelled of lemon polish and fear. It was a sterile, cold environment designed to strip away human emotion and leave only the raw facts of the law. I sat in the witness box. My hands rested on the smooth wood of the railing. I looked out at the gallery. It was packed. Reporters scribbled in notebooks. My former neighbors sat in the back rows, their faces pale and drawn. But my eyes were fixed on the defense table. Tyrell and Heather sat there dressed in orange jumpsuits that clashed violently with the mahogany furniture. They looked smaller than I remembered. Without their designer clothes and their arrogance, they were just two scared children waiting for the principal. But I was not the principal. I was the witness to their destruction. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Ms. Vance, stood before me. She asked me to recount the events of that week. I did not stutter. I did not cry. I told the story with the clinical precision of the intelligence analyst I used to be. I described the airport. I described how Heather refused to let me buy water because it cost $5. I described the way they laughed in first class while I sat in the back row squeezed between strangers. The jury listened. I saw their faces harden. I saw a woman in the second row wipe a tear. Then I described the desert. I made them feel the heat. I described the dust choking my throat. I described the sound of the Jeep engine fading away, leaving me in a silence so profound it felt like the grave. I looked directly at Heather as I spoke. She tried to stare me down, but her eyes darted away. She could not hold my gaze. I told the jury about the look on her face when she told me to get out of the car. It was not regret, it was not fear, it was annoyance. She looked at me like I was a bag of trash she had to drag to the curb on a rainy Tuesday. I paused to take a sip of water. The sound of the glass touching the table echoed in the silent room. They did not just leave me to die, I said, my voice low and steady. They left me there because I was inconvenient. They traded 40 years of love for a quick sale on a house they did not own. They looked at my life and decided it was worth less than a gambling debt. Tyrell had his head in his hands. He was shaking. I knew he was crying, but his tears did not move me. They were the tears of a man who got caught, not a man who was sorry. I finished my testimony. I stepped down from the stand. The walk back to my seat felt like walking through a tunnel. I felt the eyes of the jury on me. They were not looking at a victim anymore, they were looking at a survivor, and they were looking at the monsters who had tried to kill him. The trial moved to the sentencing phase. The judge, a stern man with gray hair and eyes like flint, asked the defendants if they had anything to say before he passed judgment. Heather refused to speak. She sat stone still, her jaw clenched, her eyes fixed on a spot on the wall. She knew there was nothing she could say to fix this. She was calculating. She was already thinking about appeals. She was already thinking about how to manipulate the next person she met. But Tyrell stood up. He stood up slowly, his chains rattling against the table. He looked terrible. His face was gaunt. His eyes were red and swollen. He looked at the judge, and then he turned to look at me. "Dad," he rasped. His voice was broken. "Dad, please. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I was scared. I did not know what else to do. You have to believe me." He took a step toward the gallery, but the bailiff moved to block him. Tyrell collapsed against the table. "Remember when I was 5, he sobbed. "Remember when you taught me to ride a bike? You promised you would never let go. You said you would always be there to catch me. Please, Dad, catch me now. Do not let them take me away. I am your son. I am your boy." The courtroom was silent. It was a painful, awkward silence. The plea was raw. It was the sound of a drowning man begging for a rope. For a second, I felt a pull in my chest. I remembered that day in the park. I remembered running behind his little bicycle, my hand on the seat, his laughter ringing in the air. I remembered the promise. I had made that promise. I had meant it. I stood up. The prosecutor tried to motion for me to sit, but the judge held up a hand allowing me to speak. I looked at the weeping man in the orange jumpsuit. I looked for my son. I looked for the boy who scraped his knees and cried for his daddy, but he was not there. "I remember that day, Tyrell," I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I remember holding the seat. I remember cheering for you. I loved that little boy more than my own life. I would have died for that 5-year-old boy." Tyrell looked up, hope flaring in his wet eyes. "But that boy is dead," I continued, my voice turning to ice. "That boy died a long time ago. He was killed by greed. He was killed by entitlement. The man standing before me is not my son. The man standing before me is a stranger who looked me in the eye and left me to burn in the sun." Tyrell flinched as if I had struck him. "I forgive the 5-year-old boy," I said. "I forgive the child who didn't know better. I will carry his memory with me until I die. But I cannot forgive the 32-year-old man, the man who chose money over blood, the man who let his wife drive the getaway car. That man is a criminal, and criminals must be punished." I sat down. The hope in Tyrell's eyes died. It was replaced by a hollow darkness. He slumped back into his chair, defeated. He knew it was over. He knew the bridge was burned and the ashes had blown away. The judge cleared his throat. He shuffled the papers on his bench. He looked at Heather, then at Tyrell. "You have committed crimes that are repugnant to the very concept of family," the judge said, his voice booming. "You preyed on the vulnerable. You betrayed the sacred trust between parent and child, and you did it for profit. This court finds no reason for leniency." He looked at Tyrell. "Tyrell Brooks, you are hereby sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. You will not be eligible for parole until you have served 85% of your sentence." Tyrell let out a low moan, a sound of pure despair. 15 years. He would be almost 50 when he got out. His life as he knew it was over. The judge turned to Heather. "Heather Brooks, the court finds you to be the primary instigator of this conspiracy. Your manipulation, your callousness, and your history of fraud make you a danger to society. You are sentenced to 20 years in a federal penitentiary." Heather did not scream this time. She just closed her eyes. 20 years. She had gambled her life for a house in Queens and she had lost everything. The gavel came down. It made a sharp cracking sound that echoed like a gunshot. Bang. It was done. The sound was final. It was the sound of a coffin lid slamming shut. It was the sound of a door locking. "Take them away," the judge ordered. The bailiffs moved in. They pulled Tyrell and Heather to their feet. Tyrell was limp, dragging his feet, weeping softly. Heather walked stiffly, her face blank, her soul already gone. They led them out through a side door. They did not look back. They did not look at me. They vanished into the system, into the concrete belly of the prison industrial complex. The courtroom began to empty. People were whispering, glancing at me with a mixture of awe and pity. I sat there for a moment longer, watching the empty doorway where my family had disappeared. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Miller. "It is over, boss," he said softly. I nodded. "Yes, it is over." I stood up. I smoothed the lapels of my suit. I felt lighter. The weight of the deception, the weight of the fear, the weight of the betrayal had been lifted. I had cut out the cancer. It had been painful. It had left a scar. But I was still standing. I picked up my hat. I walked down the center aisle of the courtroom, my head held high. I did not look back at the empty defense table. I walked out into the hallway and toward the exit. Outside, the sun was shining. The air was fresh. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs. I was 70 years old. I had $15 million. I had a plane ticket to Italy in my pocket. My son was gone, but my life was not. I walked down the courthouse steps, ready for the next chapter. The mailman was retired, the father was retired, but Jeremiah Brooks was just getting started. The house in Queens was empty, the furniture was gone, donated to a local shelter. The walls were bare, stripped of the family photos that had chronicled a lie spanning 3 decades. I walked through the rooms one last time, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors I had once refinished with pride. This place had been my sanctuary, my fortress against the world. Now it was just a building made of brick and mortar and bad memories. I stopped in the living room where Tyrell had taken his first steps. I remembered the joy I felt then, the boundless hope for his future. That hope was ash now. I carried a small metal trash can into the center of the room. In my hand I held a stack of photographs. Tyrell at his graduation, smiling in a gown I had worked double shifts to pay for. Tyrell at his wedding, looking handsome and deceitful next to Heather. Tyrell holding a baseball bat in the backyard. I looked at the boy in the pictures. I tried to find the monster he would become, but he wasn't there. The monster had grown in the shadows, fed by my own blindness and his own weakness. I struck a match. The flame flared bright and hungry. I held it to the corner of the graduation photo. The paper curled and blackened, the smiling face consumed by fire. I dropped it into the can. One by one, I burned them all. The wedding, the birthdays, the vacations. I watched my son life turn into smoke. It wasn't an act of hatred. It was an act of cleansing. I was cauterizing the wound so it could finally heal. I was erasing the evidence of my greatest failure so I could make room for my greatest success. The last photo was of the 3 of us, me, Tyrell, and Heather at a barbecue 2 years ago. We looked happy. We looked like a family. I stared at it for a long moment, letting the bitterness wash over me one last time. Then I dropped it into the flames. "Goodbye, son," I whispered. The fire died down, leaving only gray ash. I picked up the can and walked to the backyard. I dumped the ashes onto the soil of the rose bush my late wife had planted. Dust to dust. I walked out the front door and locked it for the last time. The for sale sign was already on the lawn. A young couple was coming to view it in an hour. They looked hopeful, eager to start their lives. I hoped their story would have a happier ending than mine. I got into the waiting town car. I didn't look back. The house was the past. I was headed for the future. The headquarters of the Silver Shield Foundation was located in a sleek glass building in Manhattan overlooking the harbor. It was a far cry from the dusty post office sorting room. I walked through the lobby, nodding to the security guards who straightened up as I passed. They knew I wasn't just a donor. I was the architect. I took the elevator to the penthouse floor. The doors opened to a hive of activity. Analysts were typing furiously at computer terminals, tracking financial flows across borders. Case managers were on the phone with embassies and law enforcement agencies coordinating rescues. This was my new family, a family built not on blood, but on a shared mission to protect the vulnerable. Miller was waiting for me in my office. He was wearing a suit now, looking less like a field agent and more like a director of operations, which is exactly what he was. "Boss," he said, greeting me with a firm handshake. "We have a situation in Thailand. A 75-year-old widow from Chicago. Her nephew took her there for a spiritual retreat and left her in a hostel with no passport. He is trying to access her 401k right now." I sat down at my desk, which was covered in files. I looked at the photo of the widow. She looked scared, confused. She looked like me 2 months ago. "Do we have eyes on her?" I asked. We have a local team on the ground, Miller confirmed. They are moving her to a safe house tonight. We have already flagged the nephew accounts. He is going to be very surprised when he tries to make a withdrawal. Good, I said. Freeze everything. And get the legal team ready. I want that nephew in a U.S. courtroom before he can finish his Mai Tai. This was Silver Shield. We weren't just a charity. We were a private intelligence agency dedicated to hunting down predators who preyed on the elderly. We used forensic accounting surveillance and international legal pressure to rescue victims and punish their abusers. We did what the police often couldn't or wouldn't do. We brought the hammer down. I spent the next few hours reviewing case files. There were so many of them. Sons stealing from mothers, grandchildren manipulating grandparents, caregivers forging wills. It was a pandemic of greed. But for every file on my desk, there was a team working to stop it. We were saving lives. We were saving dignity. And every time we put a predator behind bars, I felt a little bit of the weight lift from my own soul. I looked out the window at the Statue of Liberty standing tall in the harbor. She was a symbol of hope. I wanted Silver Shield to be a symbol of justice, a warning to anyone who thought the elderly were easy targets. We are not prey, I thought. We are the ones who built this world, and we will defend it. Miller walked back in holding a tablet. The Thailand operation is green-lit, he said. And we just got a hit on that case in Florida, the daughter trying to sell her mother condo while she is in rehab. We have the wire transfer records. Excellent, I said. Send it to the FBI. And Miller booked me a flight. Where to? Miller asked, smiling. Rome, I said. I have a date with a plate of pasta and a bottle of wine that costs more than my old car. Miller laughed. You earned it, boss. I stood up and put on my coat. I walked through the office, listening to the hum of justice being served. I stopped by the wall of success stories, photos of rescued seniors smiling safe-free. There was a blank space at the end. I pulled a small photo from my pocket. It was a selfie I had taken in the mirror of the hotel room after the trial. I looked tired, but my eyes were clear and sharp. I pinned it to the wall. Jeremiah Brooks, survivor, founder. I walked to the elevator. My work here was done for today, but the mission would never end. As long as there were people like Tyrell and Heather in the world, there would be people like me waiting in the shadows, ready to strike back. JFK International Airport was bustling as usual, a chaotic river of humanity flowing toward destinations all over the globe. I walked through the first-class check-in terminal, my new Italian leather luggage gliding silently beside me. I didn't limp. I didn't hunch. I moved with the confidence of a man who owns his space. I handed my passport to the agent. Not the dummy one Heather had stolen, but my real one stamped with visas from my old life. Mr. Brooks, she said, smiling. You are all set. Seat 1A to Rome. The lounge is to your right. Thank you, I said. I turned to head toward security, but a commotion near the economy check-in line caught my attention. A young couple was arguing loudly with an older man. He looked to be in his 80s, frail, leaning on a walker. He was wearing a faded windbreaker and looked bewildered. Grandpa, hurry up, the young man shouted, grabbing the old man's arm roughly. You are holding up the line. We're going to miss the flight. I told you I needed my pills. The old man stammered, his voice thin and frightened. They are in the other bag. We don't have time for your pills, the young woman snapped. Just move it. You are so slow, you are ruining everything. I stopped. The scene was like a punch to the gut. It was a mirror image of my own nightmare, the impatience, the cruelty, the helplessness in the old man's eyes. I saw the way the young couple looked at each other, a look of shared annoyance and calculation. I saw the way they gripped their own expensive bags while the grandfather struggled with his walker. I could have walked away. I had a flight to catch. I had a new life to live. But I wasn't just Jeremiah Brooks, the retiree, anymore. I was the shield. I changed course. I walked straight up to the trio. My presence was imposing. My suit was armor. My eyes were weapons. Excuse me, I said, my voice deep and resonant, cutting through their bickering. The young man spun around, surprised. What do you want? I ignored him. I looked directly at the grandfather. Sir, are you okay? I asked gently. The old man looked at me, his eyes wide. I just need my medicine, my heart pills. He is fine, the young woman interjected, stepping between us. He is just confused. We are taking care of him. Mind your own business. I looked at her. I saw the same dead ambition I had seen in Heather's eyes. I saw the predator sizing up the prey. I am making it my business, I said coldly. I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out a heavy cream-colored business card embossed with a Silver Shield logo. I pressed it into the old man's trembling hand. "Sir, my name is Jeremiah Brooks," I said. "This is my direct line. It is a 24-hour service. If you feel unsafe, if you feel like you are being forced to go somewhere you don't want to go, if anyone tries to take your money or your dignity, you call this number. We have people everywhere. We can help you." The old man looked at the card, then at me. He saw something in my face. Recognition. Solidarity. "Thank you," he whispered, clutching the card like a lifeline. The young man stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "Hey, you cannot just—" I turned my gaze on him. I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I just let him see the man who had taken down cartels and his own son. "I suggest you help your grandfather find his medication," I said softly. "And I suggest you treat him with the respect he deserves. Because if I find out that something happens to him, if I find out he gets lost, you will not be dealing with the airline. You will be dealing with me. And I promise you, son, you do not want that." The young man swallowed hard. He took a step back, his bravado evaporating. "Yes, sir," he mumbled. I nodded once. I turned and walked away, heading toward the security checkpoint. I didn't look back. I knew the seed had been planted. I knew the old man had a weapon now. I walked through the metal detector. I gathered my things. I walked toward the gate, toward Rome, toward pasta and wine and freedom. I was Jeremiah Brooks. I was 70 years old, and I was the most dangerous man in the airport. Before I go, let me know in the comments if you would have given your son a second chance. Hit like and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold. And remember, watch your back because you never know who is watching out for you. I spent 40 years building a shield to protect my family, but I forgot that sometimes the danger is already inside the house. The hardest lesson was not learning how to survive the desert, but learning how to survive the heartbreak of betrayal. We tell ourselves that blood is thicker than water, but sometimes blood is just another stain you have to wash away. Real family is not defined by who you raise. It is defined by who stands by you when the world turns its back. Do not set yourself on fire to keep ungrateful people warm. Respect is earned, not inherited. If you enjoyed watching justice be served cold, hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories of the underestimated fighting back, and let me know in the comments, would you have visited Tyrell in prison, or did he get exactly what he deserved?